Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Tonight, I'm here with my good friend, Dee Pierce,
Mm-hmm.
host of Around
Happy to be
the World
here.
with Dee and Friends. I am very happy you are here, Dee. Topics for tonight are Highway to Hell, question mark, that is to say, uh, is the United States on a highway to hell? And then there are also some people are hoping for a return to negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. That hope is highly problematic, and we'll talk about that. Then our next topic is the wars uh, of NATO, all these wars that NATO is getting involved in. And what are we fighting for? What's it all about? What's NATO all about? What sense does it all make? Then we're also going to deal with the impact of the U.S. Uh, of the war that Israel and the U.S. Have picked, the fight that they've picked with Iran. What kind of impact has that had? And then finally, Donald Trump has chosen to hand down, okay, an ultimatum to his erstwhile friend Vladimir Putin. And Putin has chosen to respond. And so we're gonna deal as best we can with that response. So those are the topics for tonight. We will start as we usually do by sharing on Facebook. If you'll give us a moment to do so. Okay, we've got some people here, but nobody yet we can see, which means that they're most probably Twitter folks at this point. So we're going to start off with the highway to hell topic. And to facilitate that topic, we're going to share a video. It's an interview that Colonel Danny Davis had with the Colonel Douglas McGregor. And you're seeing Doug's face on the screen here. And I'll start it up right now.
Change lanes. We're still on.
I thought phone radiation was fake until I saw what celebs are putting on their iPhones. Celebrities don't get cases for their phones.
The only thing we did when we elected Trump was we changed lanes. We're still on the same highway. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you ultimately threaten people long enough, they'll abandon you, and that's happening. We now have SIPRs, which is the alternative to the SWIFT system. We're watching countries do business with each other in their own currencies, whether it's...
Okay, that's a system from China that people can use to settle trades with each other. I don't think it's SIPRs, I think it's SIPs, but okay.
Japan and China, or Saudi Arabia and China, or Iran and China, it doesn't matter. They're doing business in their own currencies. In other words, people are getting away from the dollar. We are being isolated, the original carrier of the plague. Put us in a room. And then you have President Trump, who decides, I'm going to bomb these.
The original carrier of the plague, patient zero. We are patient zero, as Doug is fond of putting it.
Sites in Iran, and joins the war as a co-belligerent. You have our allies in Tokyo and Seoul watching this and saying, this man's lost his mind. There's no reason for this. What are we doing this for? You know, and this unconditional obedience to whatever comes out of Israel. All of this is doing enormous damage to the American people in the United States. And I think it's hurting Europe because we're dragging them down with us. At some point, this is going to change because I predict the governments in Europe will change. But remember that America is also the microwave nation. You know this, Dan. Well, when's this going to happen? Well, next week. And I will look at people, I say, well, it's developing. These things are coming together, but it's not going to happen overnight. BRICS did not happen overnight. It began over time, but we've accelerated the process. They've now built institutions much more rapidly than we thought possible. The point is that Americans say if you do something on day one, then on day two it should happen. It's not that way. The world does not operate like a microwave, but we're headed in very dangerous and bad directions unnecessarily. Because remember something else, we're harming people and nations who are our creditors. Think about that. Why would you take action against Japan in particular, who's our largest creditor outside of the United States? What is the purpose of that? What if these people decide, and I think they're getting close to it, to simply offload our treasuries in a giant fire sale? Well, they're not going to be the...
I have to add here, if they want to offload our treasuries, they have to find people to buy the treasuries. If they do find people to buy treasuries at a reasonable price, then we don't have any problem. We don't really care who holds our treasuries, as long as there are some people who hold the treasuries. Even then, we don't really have to care, but that's a subject for another day. So, okay, the question is, what if they decide to offload our treasuries? So that means the value of the treasuries in the open market, okay, is going to go down somewhat. But from our point of view, okay, is that a problem? It's a problem only if we're selling treasuries into the open market. Okay, but the treasuries being sold by other nations are treasuries that are already out there, in the open market. So we've already gotten the money for those treasuries. So unless we have to issue more treasuries or believe we have to issue more treasuries, it's really not a problem for us if they dump our treasuries.
Lone Rangers, when that happens, the countries just say, we've had it. We're not dealing with these people anymore. We depend on foreign investment. That's how our system works. People show up, they buy our bonds, we take the money, The money helps us sustain ourselves, our economy. And this is a cycle that is being.
The money that comes in from foreign investors, okay, is certainly is money. Well, actually, what happens to that money is that when we deposit it, that money is destroyed by the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve issues new funds in place of the funds that they destroyed in settlement. So that's all that happens. Doesn't seem too serious to me.
Going on for decades. When the foreign investment stops, what do? Well, we've been buying our own bonds. That's called toxic debt that sits on.
Well, why is it toxic debt? So we buy, our own bonds. In other words, say that the Federal Reserve wants to avoid a liquidity crisis, and so it does quantitative easing, and the Fed buys our own bonds from the private markets. Doug is saying that's toxic debt. But what is toxic about it? I mean, it's going to be repaid by the Treasury when it falls due. It's guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. And as we all should know, the federal government, in the person of the Federal Reserve, the agency, the Federal Reserve, has the money to create new reserves out of thin air. So where's the problem? In other words, implicit in Doug's treatment here is the idea that the federal government should not or cannot create new money. So we're dependent on the old money in the hands of investors. I don't agree with that position.
Sits on your desk at the Fed, but it has no value. You're buying up your own stuff to conceal the disaster that's underway. That's why you've got to look at all of these factors.
Why is it a disaster? In other words, the disaster is that, he's claiming that it's a disaster when investors don't want to buy our Treasury bonds. But that assumes we need investors to buy, our Treasury bonds. It assumes we have to issue Treasury bonds. And the question arises, why?
But anybody who does, anyone who's a competent economist, and there are lots of them that people can go listen to, they're warning us that this is not going to end well.
There are people who believe that the government either cannot or should not create its own money. And so therefore it's a disaster when we don't have people who already have US dollars, refuse to buy Treasury bonds.
And it will come to a climax at some point. That's why we thought when we voted for President Trump, he would say, number one, I have to shed these overseas commitments, got to end these conflicts. I got to bring most of the forces home because I have to cut spending. I have to show our creditors that we're serious about reducing spending.
So Doug wanted Trump to reduce the spending. Does Doug understand that when the spending is reduced and the deficits are smaller, then the contributions of the federal government to the non-government are less? That there's less money flowing from the federal government into the non-government sector? Does he understand sectoral financial balances?
I mean, that's effectively what he said. And what have we got now? We've got more of the same. So people are now saying, well, write them off. These people are crazy. They've lost their minds. They're going to go over the cliff. We are going to go over the cliff.
It's just, I thought the way you put that a while ago was really.
He seems to think that if we can't find investors to buy our bonds, we're going to go over the cliff. No, I think what's going to happen is one of two things are going to happen. One is that will just create some new money that's been appropriated by Congress through the Congress ordering the Federal Reserve to create new money for the Treasury spending account. That's known as overt congressional financing, okay, or OCF. That might happen. The other thing that might happen is the president might simply decide to mint very high value platinum coins. Let's say, for the sake of the example, a $100 trillion platinum coin. And then he would order the Secretary of the Treasury to cause that coin to be minted, and then the coin to be deposited in the mint's account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That coin, which is legal tender, would have to be credited by the Federal Reserve Bank, and there would be $100 trillion in the account, okay, of the U.S. Mint. There's a law on the books that allows the Treasury Department to sweep the account of the Mint for the coin seigniorage. Okay, that's in it. The coin seigniorage is the difference between the face value of the coin, $100 trillion in this case, and the cost of producing the coin and of transporting it up to the Federal Reserve to deposit. That would roughly be, I don't know, $5,000 or $6,000. Changes a little bit each year. When I first started talking about it, it would cost $3,000 to do it. So let's say it's doubled by now and it's at $6,000. So then the Treasury would be sweeping into its own spending account nearly the whole $100 trillion. So what's wrong with that? If that happens, all of the debt we've issued could be paid off as it falls due with the interest payments. And we'd also have a lot of additional money that could be spent if Congress appropriates the spending. So what's so bad about that?
Eye-opening and so accurate. With the current administration, we didn't change routes, we just changed lanes.
So Colonel Davis completely accepts everything Colonel McGregor said about it being a disaster if people don't want to buy our debt.
On the same route, and I think we're seeing that manifest out. That's the whole Biden-like thing with the Ukraine war. That's just another manifestation of it. But let me ask you something. I know that over the years you've said several times that we don't need to be worried about China as an aggressive power that's going to invade us because they just want to do business. And do you see anything changing? And actually, a better way to put that, if you were put in charge right now and if Trump magically would just listen to you, what would you do instead of sending NATO out to get ready to fight China and Russia? What would be a better course of action?
Well, remember, we are confronting Russia on Russia's doorstep. And from the very beginning, I and a few other people said that's strategically stupid. You know, why would the Russians and the Chinese pour into Mexico, raise Mexican forces and armies, put missile installations, and threaten us from Mexico? Because we could destroy them in Mexico. Mexico's on our doorstep. Our logistical problems are minimal. So when you talk about fighting China or fighting Russia, we're talking about going thousands of miles away from the United States. Heavy dependence on long lines of communication and logistics. You know, moving forces, moving supplies, munitions, and everything else. It's unrealistic nonsense. We can't win a war over Taiwan. First of all, we don't need to. And we should get out of that business entirely. That's back to the idea of, the Chinese are going to defend us or defend Cuba against us. Why? Why would they bother? It's a lot of nonsense. So the bottom line is we got to get out of all of these things. We have to focus on our country, because everything that's really critical to our future will be decided here, not over there. And Americans, I think, instinctively understand that, but Washington doesn't. Washington thinks everything here is fine because most of the people in Washington live in a bubble. They don't live in the real world. They're not pressed hard. And unfortunately, the elites, the people who are billionaires or worth hundreds of millions of dollars, they're not being pressed by economic matters and financial concerns here in the United States, let alone criminality and illegal aliens. It's not a problem for them. It is a problem for the overwhelming majority of Americans who care about their country and are trying to make a life for themselves and their children. But the bottom line is that China, you want to deal with China. China right now, Chinese ownership of agricultural land in the United States. You know how much agricultural land the Chinese actually own? Less than 1% of our agricultural land. Now, if you don't like that, you know what you do? You pass a
So that doesn't sound like it's much of a problem, does it?
bill. And the bill says no foreign entity can own agricultural property in the United States.
See, it's easy. Simply pass a bill. Of course, lots of bills that lately we've had a very tough time passing. But in theory, the solution to that problem is quite easy. Just pass a bill saying the Chinese can't buy the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no foreign entity could buy, our agricultural land.
They can't own minerals. They can't own mines. Just pass the bill. And then they have to divest themselves. It's very simple. Secondly, if you don't like the fact, a lot of people don't, and I agree with them, that we have massive numbers of Chinese in our laboratories, at universities, well, then you need to have an executive order that says all the Chinese are going to leave and send them home.
Would that really be good for us? Are the Chinese in our laboratories making great contributions to American science? I mean, I think they probably are. So why wouldn't we want them to continue here and to settle here and to become Americans? It seems to me that would be very good for the United States.
Definitely.
Get control of your borders. Get control of the harbors, of the airports. We have no control over any of that.
We should have control over the harbors, okay, and the airports, or at least a lot more than we have now. I mean, that's part of what national sovereignty is about.
People pour in and out all the time. Now, somebody will say, well, we don't want to throw all the Chinese out. Well, that's fine. Then we can be discriminating. But my point is, there are ways to deal with this. The Vietnamese a few years ago threw all the Chinese out of Vietnam.
Now, it's interesting that all the Chinese left. I would have thought it would be hard to throw the Chinese out of, Vietnam, because Chinese have been settling in Southeast Asia for a very long time, and usually they become part of the societies that they settle in. And they're no particular problem for those places. In fact, they're very valuable. Certainly, this is the case in Thailand. I spent some time in Thailand many, years ago now, okay, in 1969. But the Chinese were thoroughly integrated into Thailand. And the business they did really brought a lot of good things to Thailand.
Are the Chinese and the Vietnamese doing business? Yes.
That's a good point.
The Chinese have thrown Japanese out of China. Are the Chinese and the Japanese doing business? Yes. Listen, this is the real world.
In Thailand, one way the Chinese did business with the Thai is that the Chinese people in China would do business with the Chinese people in Thailand, thus contributing to the economy of Thailand. But the fact that there were Chinese in both places facilitated international transactions.
You make decisions on the basis of your national interest. That's what you do. But the Japanese are not going to attack China. Chinese don't want to attack Japan. The Chinese certainly don't want to go back to Vietnam. They did that in 1979. That was a very unsatisfactory experience.
Okay, Doug is right about all this from the standpoint of nobody wants to fight a war there.
No,
They want to trade with each other. They want to
exactly.
They want to be nice to each other. So what's wrong with that? I don't know. Doesn't seem wrong to me.
Listen, we have to come back to reality and stop looking at everything as a potential club with which to hit people over the head. And that's the way we look at the financial system, which we built after the war, which is crumbling, frankly. It's falling apart now. We don't want to live. We say we understand this. President Trump says he understands it and is prepared for it. But in reality, we don't want to live in a world where we don't have hegemony over everything. You know, if we did, we'd change overnight, dramatically scale back our investment in the defense budget and bring our forces home.
So there, Doug has put his finger on it,
Mm-hmm.
on what the problem is. It's that we continue to want to be the hegemon. We just can't accept that we're going to be a pole in a multipolar world. We're not going to be the hegemon. Isn't going to be a hegemon.
You know, but we don't really believe that. It's the same problem that Israel has right now. Israel refuses to live in a region that it does not dominate. So what's that mean? That means that everybody has to be subjugated to Israel. How does Israel do that? With us. That's our job, to subjugate everybody to Israel. That's ridiculous. And that's not a good future for Israel. If Israel wants to exist in that region, it has to come to a different arrangement. Just as if we want to exist in the world, we have to come to terms with a different arrangement. We cannot always dominate.
And you know what you mentioned a minute ago about a lot in Europe, people wise anyway, are starting to get uncomfortable with the way the elites are doing it with the France, Germany, UK, etc. They have been dominating stuff. But then this is kind of maybe like a canary in the coal mine with Robert Fico talking about how he's getting damn tired of a lot of this because I don't know if it's passed since I haven't seen since we came on the air, but Europe was just about to pass its 18th round of sanctions against Russia. But Slovakia, among others, are saying, hey, this is bad for us. I don't want to get into this. Here's how he put it.
We will never vote for this madness of the Commission. The phone calls of the hardliners are coming to an end. There is a written proposal of the Commission's guarantees on the table, which the Commission offers us for voting on the 18th sanction package. I have already said that this dispute cannot be won 100-0, but we cannot even lose it 100-0. Those who want to live with the wolves must live with them. This is unfortunately the cruel reality of the current union. Therefore, we must fight to the last moment for an acceptable compromise. Right now, I am sending a proposal of the Commission's guarantees to all relevant political parties, and I expect a statement from them. I believe that the answers of the presidents of the opposing parties will not harm Slovakia at all costs. It is necessary to realize that the suspension of the flow of Russian gas will take place after 1.1/2028, i.e. after the parliamentary elections, and it may be the current opposition, which will gain power and which will have to wipe the tears of the abandoned workers or run away from their anger.
that last phrase is what really got me, because or run away from their anger. He seems to be warning that if we keep going down this path here, which is the elites running everything at the pointing at confrontation with Russia, that at some point even the local populations may rise up. How do you see it?
Eventually, yes, but it's back to what we discussed earlier. They have to be touched by the destruction. In other words, their lives have to be severely harmed in a way that's unambiguous. Until that happens, most of the Europeans will sort of march like sheep in the direction their leaders tell them to go, provided it doesn't hurt them. As soon as there's some real pain, all of that will change. I don't think that's really surprising. It's in the
So that is Doug's particular theory of change. That's why he's a little pessimistic about there being good solutions to European problems right at the moment. He doesn't think that people are hurting enough.
nature of most modern societies that they behave that way. Let me finish with something that's very important for most Americans and people in the West to understand. In 1914, Russia's number one trading partner in the world was Germany. And Germany's number one trading partner in the world was Russia. In 1941, Germany's number one trading partner was the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union's number one trading partner was Germany. Now, my point is this. It's self-defeating for the people that live in Europe to behave as they are behaving because of what we are telling them to do. That's the real crux of the matter. And it goes back to the simple truth that we don't live in Europe. We're Americans. We live in the Western Hemisphere. We live in North America. And the Europeans have got to come to terms with that. They've never really understood that. De Gaulle was the exception. And he said that from the very beginning. And he pointed out that Britain was not really part of Europe. It was an island. And again, British interests on that island were never connected absolutely with what happened on the continent. And he knew that. So there has to be a re-examination of all the things that are going on. But right now, the elites that are in power will not do that. These are the Sorosistas, the products of the globalist movement.
He attributes the globalist movement to Soros, at least as one of the most important people, pushing the globalist movement. I have never heard them called the Sorosistas before, though. That's a little new terminology for me.
They are the ones responsible for the destruction that has already been wrought across Europe. They will, I suspect, be held accountable. I don't know what it'll look like. It could look like the Place de la Vendée, the French Revolution in 1789 before we're through. There will be so many people so angry about the misfortune visited on them.
If I recall correctly, that location, the Place de Vendée, was the location where they guillotined all the aristocrats.
I think we're going to face something similar here at some point when people finally say that's enough, no more. And the disappointment here is particularly acute because so many people express such faith in President Trump's readiness to chart a fundamentally new course. That's all gone under.
Well,
Doug is very unhappy with President Trump. Also, you can see from his comments here that Doug is very oriented towards peace, finding a peaceful solution in Europe and a peaceful solution in Ukraine. And he believes the reason why that has not occurred or taken place is due to us. We don't really want a peaceful solution. We want to continue the hegemony of the United States. So from his point of view, we are the major cause of the war in Ukraine.
listen, I appreciate you bring, at least explaining what's going on, the fact that we've changed lanes, not changed paths. And I appreciate more than anything else your path that it doesn't have to go down this way. There hasn't been this uprising yet. We haven't paid this price yet with the pain having been inflicted upon us. And there's still possibility, as late as it is in the hour, to shift course. And then you've laid out what is a good course, something that could be beneficial for everybody, lower the tensions anywhere else, raise the possibility of economic prosperity, and then set a course that can be sustained for a long time. That is like the recipe for something great. We just have to hope that we can get there, even if it's by stumbling and mistakes. But that's certainly a better course than where we're heading right now. And we really appreciate you highlighting that today.
Okay, Dan, good to talk with you and Gary.
Thank you very much. And the same with us as well. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis.
Okay, so Danny and Doug are friends. Doug commanded a tank division in the first Iraq War. Very successful commander of tanks. Okay, and Danny was his subordinate in that war, commanding parts of a tank division. Both of these officers are highly decorated. And I think they both are pretty wise when it comes to looking at the realities of war and peace currently. So let's see what comments we have about that one. Not much. Evelyn is here, says hi. Steve Wolfbrandt is here and says hello from Facebook. And then Steve says hello from YouTube also. Thank you, Steve. Please, everyone who is here, share, like, and subscribe. I notice my picture is a little frozen here. Okay, can I be heard, Dee? Hello, Dee.
Yes. Yes. You sound good.
Okay, so as long as my sound is all right, I'll go on and wait for things to unfreeze. Okay, when I share something, I take it that's not frozen, right?
Right. It's not frozen.
It's just my own picture. So
Yes.
I don't know what's causing that, but I don't think it's terribly important. So let us move on to the next of our subjects, and that is the subject of Iran talks. And we have a piece here by Larry Johnson on that. Pretty
Okay.
cool. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Dee,
Okay.
to expound on that piece.
Okay. Let me make it larger here.
Okay.
Okay. Sonar 21, 17 July 2025 by Larry C. Johnson. Iran toughens stance on negotiations with the U.S. It's a meeting of Azerbaijan and Iran diplomats.
Yes.
I just received the following from Press TV in Iran, and it refutes Donald Trump's claim that Iran is eager to negotiate.
Oh, what a surprise.
I know, right? A senior Iranian political figure has told Iranian Press TV that Iran is rethinking its approach to nuclear negotiations and will not enter new talks using the same framework or agenda. Referencing to the U.S. request to resume negotiations, the source emphasized that any talks must align with the real security dynamics of the region. He expressed skepticism about the U.S. intentions for peace, stating that the goal of Washington is to disarm Iran to compensate for Israel's weakness in the next potential war. The political figure added any new negotiations must include serious and practical guarantees, including scrutiny of Israel's nuclear and WMD programs, credible punishment of the regime, i.e., Israel, and compensation to Iran. He stressed in the absence of these conditions, negotiations will merely serve as a prelude to war. He added Tehran is willing to, quote, offer another opportunity, but requires evidence that U.S. negotiator Witkoff is pursuing peace rather than escalation.
So, just a comment on this. Okay, the Iranians have now gotten a reality check. That reality check to them seems to have meant that all the talking they've done with the U.S. so far was all a waste of time, because the U.S. was just pursuing a deception.
Yes, that's exactly what happened.
Yes. And that uh, 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 the Israelis, with the consent of the U.S., were just trying to provide some space for a surprise attack by Israel, which took place. So, from the Iranian point of view, it's changed their perceptions. And they're calling, if there are to be talks, calling for a new framework. And what has to be part of that framework has to include serious and practical guarantees, including scrutiny of Israel's nuclear and WMD programs. That's the first time such a demand has come out of Iran. And I am so glad to see it.
Mm-hmm.
I am tired of Israel being able to get away with a nuclear program that has left them with 200 to 300, nuclear warheads. And supposedly nobody in the world is supposed to mention this out loud. Diplomats from all countries are supposed to ignore this, and are supposed to ignore that is the Israelis who have spurned the NPT agreement and who are not submitting to inspections of any kind, and who don't even want people to talk about, their nuclear program, while they go around, attacking Iran because it wants to have a nuclear program too. I mean, this kind of hypocrisy cannot be the basis of peace, in international affairs. And I am very glad that Iran is saying, if you want us to limit our nuclear program, then Israel's nuclear program and WMD programs have to be on the table too. Otherwise, we're not talking. I'm so glad to see the Iranians take this position. Okay, please go on, Dee.
Okay, there you have it. Iran is
Well,
willing.
I think you're at, he's stressed.
Oh, swear. Let me see.
Okay, 2 sentences above that. He stressed in the absence of these conditions.
He stressed, in the absence of these conditions, negotiations will merely serve as a prelude to war. He added Tehran is willing to, quote, offer another opportunity, but requires evidence that U.S. negotiator Witkoff is pursuing peace rather than escalation. Well,
why?
I think they're pursuing escalation. That's what the U.S. is doing.
I think they're pursuing escalation also. But what would be evidence that he wouldn't be pursuing escalation? It would be if he showed up and uh, uh, he came with an offer of the United States to compel Israel to go public, with its nuclear program and submit to the NPT, okay, and to inspections before this is actually required, okay, of Iran or any other nation that doesn't yet have a nuclear program.
There you have it. Iran is willing to talk, but only if the conditions outlined above are met by Washington. This means there will be no further negotiations and that Iran will busy itself preparing for the next U.S.-Israeli attack. Iran's requirement that Israel be subjected to the same type of scrutiny of its nuclear program as Iran is. A new but not surprising demand. While Iran's demands are reasonable, I cannot imagine any scenario where Trump would agree. I just think that Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, did some work for Bibi Netanyahu at Trump's direction. In 2020, she briefly worked for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's campaign, underscoring a professional relationship within Israeli politics. She is a critical voice in any decision that Trump makes regarding Israel, especially when it comes to negotiating with Iran. Staying in the region, but shifting to a neighboring country. I have received a terrific email from a reader who provides excellent insight into the dynamics at play among Azerbaijan, Iran, Ukraine, and Russia. Both Western media and social media outlets have reported in the aftermath of the 12-day war, we got call it something pithy, that Israel used Azerbaijan as a launching pad for some of its attacks on Iran. I think my new friend provides a credible explanation for why that is not true.
And this is the first article I've seen which claims, okay, that it's not true. Now, there's many others are saying very easily that Azerbaijan was a launching pad, and that the regime inside of Azerbaijan was actually selling Iran out.
Hmm.
But with that as a proviso, let's go on with the quote.
How do I know this? Firstly, on the 27th of June 2025, only days after the 12-day war between Israel and Iran was halted, Iran's new ambassador to Azerbaijan was officially received by the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan and warmly greeted. And then it tells you where you can go to and to see that. On the 4th of July 2025, the President of Iran, Pezeshkian, at the head of a large Iranian governmental delegation, traveled to Kankendi in the newly incorporated Azeri territory in Nagorno-Karabakh for a state meeting with the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan and many Azeri ministers. For photos, you can go to, and it tells you where you can go to, azertag.az English. So far, as a former analyst, what do you think the chances are that Iran would send a new ambassador and the president of Iran would travel to the country that only days earlier had allowed its territory to be used by Israel to launch deadly surprise attacks on Tehran? less than zero.
Yeah, I think that's a compelling argument. And furthermore, it must mean that from the standpoint of Iran's secret services, that they must have had very convincing uh, uh, um, um, uh, they must have had information that was very convincing that suggested the attacks coming from Azerbaijan did not come from the Azerbaijanis and did not come with their consent. So please go on.
For your information, relations between the Republic of Azerbaijan and Iran are cordial. Business relations are developing, and the North-South Rail Corridor project between Russia and Iran through Azerbaijan is proceeding apace.
Okay, that is very important because that corridor is a very important part of the north-south transportation corridor that the Russians and Iranians are trying to set up, which will end, in a port, in India. That project is very important for Russia, and the Azerbaijani part of that project is very important both for Iran and for Russia.
With this in mind, where is this easily debunkable narrative about the Republic of Azerbaijan allowing Israel to use its territory for sneak attacks on Iran coming from? To explain, I need to take you on a short history lesson. In 2020, I was present in Azerbaijan during the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The historical narrative coming out of Armenia at the time would have made Baghdad Bob blush when Armenia disastrously lost this war, and the Armenian president Pashinyan acknowledged in writing that he recognized the Nagorno-Karabakh territories as Azeri. Western pundits siding with Armenia had a lot of egg in their faces. Since the Iraq War in 2003, the ethnic Kurds have carved out a semi-autonomous state in the north of Iraq and parts of northeast Syria. These Kurdish enclaves directly border the west and east Azerbaijan provinces of Iran, located in northwest Iran, just south of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Check a provincial map for Iran for details. The Israelis have established deep ties in these Kurdish enclaves, and it is entirely conceivable that their sneak attacks on northern Iran will launch from precisely these Kurdish-held enclaves through the territories of West and East Azerbaijan provinces, further through Ardabil province in the Caspian Sea, over the Caspian Sea for 100 kilometers or so, and directly south onto Tehran and other nearby targets. This is why some disposable extra fuel tanks for drones were discovered off the northern coast of Iran. Armenian narrators, ever looking for a chance to increase tension between Iran and the Republic of Azerbaijan, have apparently launched a carefully crafted deception, confusing the two Azerbaijan provinces of Iran with the actual Republic of Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, many otherwise reliable bloggers I have jumped on the bandwagon without doing their due diligence. I would recommend to you that you never take any possible anti-Azeri narrative at face value without double checking. As concerns Russian Azeri tensions, Here we have to go back to the Second World War. After the war, large regions of today's Ukraine were essentially depopulated. Thousands of ethnic Azeris who had fought the Wehrmacht in Ukraine and in Berlin married ethnic Ukrainian ladies and settled in the country. During my 25 years in and around the Republic of Azerbaijan, I was almost astonished at how many familial ties there actually were between ethnic Ukrainians and Azeris. Azeris are also excellent business people and established solid investments in the oil and gas industries in Ukraine. The oil refinery in Kremenchug that Russian destroyed recently was owned by Azeri interest linked to President Aliyev. Apparently, there has been some sort of quote understanding that Russia would not seriously disable this refinery during the special military operation. In exchange, the Russians may have negotiated the right to use existing Soviet era pipelines to pipe their oil and gas south to the Republic of Azerbaijan. Reflag it as Azeri, and then pump it through the newly constructed BTC and other existing pipelines from Azerbaijan to Turkey and onward to Western markets. No need for, quote, ghost oil tankers on the high seas, which may simply be a diversion. It looks as though the spider's web operation tarnished these, quote, understandings. Ukrainian intelligence may have engaged certain ethnic Azeri criminal networks operating in Russia to assist with this operation. This operation, however, was not officially approved in any manner by the actual government of the Republic of Azerbaijan. The Russian response was not long in waiting, and, as usual, heavy-handed as it probably should be. The Russian response and subsequent clampdown on ethnic Azeri, quote, businessmen has opened old wounds between the Russian government and the ethnic Azeris living in Russia and Azerbaijan with predictable results. However, don't expect any major fireworks or attacks on Azeri oil fields. Although our friends in what is it the M6?
Your friends, okay, in MI6.
Yeah, MI6. Okay.
MI6 is the British Secret Service.
May stage a false flag or two to heat matters up. We should never forget the prominent positions that BP Azerbaijan holds within the Republic of Azerbaijan, although it operates very carefully.
That's interesting.
Yes.
So BP has an important interest in Azerbaijan.
Finally, the Zangezur corridor in southern Armenia, located between the two Azeri territories of the Republic of Azerbaijan proper and Nakhichevan. At the end of 2020 war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, there were discussions about opening this corridor, and this initiative has continued to this day. Now it looks as if the U.S. State Department has proposed leasing this Armenian territory to a U.S. entity, to a U.S. entity for 100 years to supervise the orderly transit of goods and services between Turkey through Nakhichevan to the Republic of Azerbaijan.
Won't this be convenient to have an American entity doing that?
Yes, 100-year lease.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A modern road, railroad, oil and gas pipelines, and a fiber optic magistral are proposed. The presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan have just recently met in the UAE and may have come to an understanding on this matter. And again, you go to azertag.az and en for English, I guess. Iran and Russia may not actually halt this initiative if they are guaranteed open access to this corridor, and it may serve their economic interest as well. It looks as if the U.S. State Department has finally come up with a good idea that may come to fruition, although the actual operator of the Zhangzhou corridor may not eventually be a direct U.S. interest.
It seems to me unlikely the Russians would approve that.
Yeah, it
I mean,
sounds sketchy.
if I were them, I would not approve a U.S. entity in there.
I wouldn't either.
I mean, no way. I mean, that corridor, of course, is part of the northwest of uh, 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 the northern uh, transportation security corridor that the Russians are trying to set up. I mean, why would they have an American company sitting in the middle of that?
Exactly.
I don't think that's too likely.
The recent visit of the current president of Syria to the Republic of Azerbaijan may be directly connected to the Zangezur corridor developments. The president of Turkmenistan has also just recently visited the Republic of Azerbaijan, possibly discussing a trans-Caspian gas pipeline to hook up to the planned pipeline links to Turkey that are to be built in the Zangezur corridor. In short, there is a lot of activity behind the scenes.
Yeah, there is. I think that letter is really fascinating
Hmm.
for all sorts of reasons, and uh, somehow Larry has lots of good sources that come to him, with offbeat interpretations of what is going on. I think this interpretation is a very valuable one to consider. I'm not sure it's true, but I think it's a very valuable one to take seriously.
And then he says here, I had the pleasure of chatting with Garland Nixon and Rashid Muhammad about current events, especially Trump's self-inflicted Epstein inferno.
Inferno, yeah, that's a good way to put it. Epstein
Yes.
Inferno, yes, very good way to put it. So that reconstruction of the Azerbaijani role is very persuasive because of the friendly meeting between the Russians and the Azerbaijanis. Or I should say the Russians and the Azeris. I think that's what we have to say.
Okay.
And Evelina found it interesting also. Says, so it wasn't Azerbaijan proper, but Kurds in the provinces from where attacks uh, were launched. I think that's really very plausible. Okay, because I think the communications between the Kurds and the provinces and the Israelis are very good. I think the Israelis are very supportive of the Kurds, and they tend to do things together. And of course, they both would want to do something uh, that would weaken uh, the Iranians. The Kurds, of course, are still looking for a state of their own, and if they could combine the Iranian areas of Kurdistan, with the Iraqi areas, okay, of Kurdistan, uh, they would be that much closer to having a Kurdish state. So it's certainly something the Kurds would like to get involved in, I think. So Evelyn says, our country is still signing 100-year leases and or treaties. Sound like something you would have done 100 years ago, if at all. Yeah. Seems like, long-term leases of that kind uh, might not be in the country's interest. Wayne Santelben says Australia is trying to buy back the lease of Darwin Port from the Chinese. In regards Azerbaijan, and Armenia, they are at loggerheads. They are at loggerheads, but of course, that doesn't mean that they might not be persuaded to do something together if it was of benefit to both sides. Even it says the basic Guantanamo was a 100-year lease. Yes, I remember. It's a 100-year lease. So, my picture is still frozen. I guess I still don't want to do anything about it, as long as it's not going to interfere with the rest of the show. So, I'll take on the next article. And it's by our favorite international correspondent, specifically Pepe Escobar. Where did it appear first? It appeared first in Strategic Culture Foundation. And the title is, and it's 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? NATO's Wars. This was done on July 18th, 2025 by Pepe, and it's a pretty short article for one of his. It's 900 words. And I don't know whose troops are marching there. It may be Russia's. The whole circus ringmaster shtick only accelerates the BRICS Global South high-speed train. He says Pepe, by way of, almost looks like a caption for that picture. Pepe says, all of you Vietnam vets and draft resistors recognize where this column's headline is coming from. Oh yes, this ain't the late 1960s anymore, so it's time to revamp it. No AI needed, and expand it. From now on, be assured, everyone in the wild, wild west will be forced to fight and or endure 3 overlapping NATO wars. War number 1. It's Europe versus Russia, of course, not proxy anymore, hot and nasty direct. Considering the advanced rottenness of the whole Ukrainian front, new fronts are already proliferating. The South Caucasus, clandestine ops in the Baltic Sea, MI6 recruiting frenzy across Central Asia, British getting involved in Central Asia again. I wonder if it'll ever stop. And fresh terrorism ahead in the Black Sea, especially Crimea. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson succinctly nailed it. We are already on World War III. Actually, we are already deep in the extended preamble to World War III. Circus ringmaster in D.C. and the billionaire's donor class behind him are, of course, clueless. Rereading Keynes' The Economic Consequences of the Peace is an absolute must like never before. History does, italics mine, repeat itself Yet this ain't 1914 or 1935. Now nuclear weapons may come into play. People who are reading this and who do want to reread the treaties by Keynes, which he published at the time of the peace conference at the end of the First World War, may also be interested in a new take on the economic consequences of the peace. It's a couple of years old now, and it's by Randy Ray and Yeva Nersessian, and it uses the arguments of Keynes in the economic consequences of peace to explain how the financial aspects, okay, of the Ukrainian war and some of the other wars might be handled after a peace conference, if we're ever to have one when it comes to the Ukraine war. The reason why their piece is important is because it's a look at the financial situation from the standpoint of the MMT lens. And it's the only MMT piece I'm aware of, that's about that. Colonel Wilkinson and Colonel McGregor and some of the other people involved in talking about the financial aspects of the conflict in Ukraine, of course, talking about the financial aspects from the point of view of people who advocate for austerity, balanced budgets, getting rid of debts, and stuff like that. So an alternative conception that takes a different approach would be a very valuable thing for them to read. Going on with the article. The Kremlin and Russia's Security Council are very much aware of the high stakes. In his recent interview to Kommersant, Sergei Shoigu even rolled out some key NATO numbers to stress the threat Russia faces. Over 50,000 tanks and armored vehicles, over 7,000 combat aircraft, over 750 warships, 350 military and civilian satellites, an immense offense budget. And the italics there for offense are added by Pepe. And then Pepe says, well, what sly Shoigu did not say is that when push comes to shove, it only takes Mr. Kinjal, Mr. Sarmat, Mr. Zircon, and Mr. Oreshnik to deliver a few strategic business cards to paralyze the whole NATO machinery in a matter of, of minutes. Of course, Kinjal, Sarmat, Zircon, and Oreshnik are all 4 types of hypersonic missiles the Russians would be able to use on NATO in a matter of minutes if such a war were to actually start. And those attacks by those missiles of Russia would be devastating. And Russia has thousands of them, to deliver on the 50,000 tanks and armored vehicles, the 7,000 combat aircraft, the 750 warships, and the 350 military and civilian satellites. Just saying. War number 2. It's the empire of chaos versus Iran in West Asia, with Eretz Israel as much as proxy as a leading actor. The circus ringmaster, whose only, quote, strategy, unquote, is to concoct shady deals to enrich himself and shysters in his closed circle, dreams of an Israeli-centric West Asia, a toxic crossover of the Abraham Accords 2.0 with the IMEC corridor, creating, as Alistair Crook defined it, quote, a business-led West Asia centered on Tel Aviv, with Trump as its de facto president, quote unquote. And via this business connectivity corridor, be able, quote, to strike further beyond, with the Gulf states penetrating into BRICS South Asian heartland, to disrupt BRICS connectivity and corridors, unquote. Using the Arabs against BRICS won't cut it, even with MBZ in the UAE and Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, who have both realized the business scam will only work if there is real peace in Gaza, some sort of humanitarian solution for the Palestinians, and rebuilding the Gaza Strip. The death cult in Tel Aviv will never allow any of the above. Their plan is to kill them all, steal all their land, and eradicate their culture. And as the genocide goes on, totally legitimized by the NATO sphere, the death cult keeps bombing anything in sight, perpetrating the balkanization of Syria and expanding the land of Israel. War number 3. It's NATO against China, already decided in the latest summit in The Hague, side by side with the continuing war on Russia. Yet actually the scam is much bigger. It's NATO's war on BRICS. That was announced casually by that unspeakable Dutch mediocrity that makes former slab of Norwegian wood Stoltenberg sound like a quantum physics star. NATO's Secretary General, otherwise known as Ruti Frutti, actually threatened India, China, and Brazil directly and ordered them to, quote, call Putin, unquote, to prevent, quote, daddy, unquote, Trump from unleashing his next tariff temper tantrum, TTT. Beijing is hardly breaking a sweat. China, humiliated the circus ringmaster by not backing down 1 inch in their trade tariff war. Russia humiliated the circus ringmaster by not being coerced into a pathetic ceasefire, quote unquote, as in allowing NATO to rearm. Then Iran humiliated the circus ringmaster by not signing an unconditional surrender. The Houthis humiliated the U.S. Navy. Now that's one for the military annals, by forcing the circus ringmaster into a ceasefire after $1 million in failed bombing. Lula in Brazil is about to humiliate the circus ringmaster by affirming Brazilian sovereignty in the face of an all-out trade and financial war. Trump even threatened to tax the popular Brazilian digital payment system. uh, known as PIX or PIX. If slapped with 50% uh, uh, tariffs, and Lula said Brasilia will slap the empire of chaos back under a reciprocity law. The whole circus ringmaster shtick, with each plot twist draped in several layers of hubris and empty bluster, only accelerates the BRICS/Global South high-speed train, now increasingly being shaped as a geoeconomic, geopolitical, and geostrategic alliance of transcontinental proportions, reaffirmed at the Rio summit. So Pepe is now getting much more optimistic in his interpretations of the results of the Rio summit. I am glad to see that. All that led, of course, by what I have been describing as a new Primakov triangle, the new RIC, Russia, Iran, and China, complete with their interlocking strategic partnerships. Quite a few top Chinese academics, not by accident, are also starting to conceptualize the emerging, quote, post-West, unquote, environment with two new eyes in BRICS, Iran and Indonesia, but not India, which should be at the heart of BRICS. I agree, India should be at the heart of BRICS, if that's what Pepe was suggesting here. But he might also have been suggesting that India step out and Iran and Indonesia be at the heart of BRICS. We must never forget, though, that 1.5 million people are currently living, in India. A billion people are living, in India. And as important as Iran and Indonesia are, the total of these two countries is something like 340 billion, but the total population of India is 340 million roughly, while the population of India is 1.5 billion. So India, in the long run, is very, very important. Going on. Meanwhile, in Europe, Tri-Continental Analysis has noted how the warmongering German BlackRock chancellor has pledged 650 billion euros, and that's in quotes, by the way, over the next 5 years toward military spending in order to reach the NATO 5% target by 2035. So even he wants 10 years to reach the 5% target. Well, I have a suggestion for him. If he wants to reach that target really quickly, he could work inside of the EU, to allow, to change the rules, so EU nations can run up to 15% of GDP in deficit spending. In other words, the reason why it would take so long is because they're now allowed only to deficit spend up to 3% of GDP. That means, going on with the article, Berlin being forced to raise about, quote, about 144 billion euros per year, unquote, via what else? Austerity and debt, translated into massive extra taxes on German consumers. But of course, if they were to change the EU agreement and allow deficits up to 15%, they wouldn't have to impose these massive extra taxes on German consumers or anyone else's side of the EU. When are those stupid idiots going to realize that? That, in a nutshell, is the, quote, program, unquote, for the whole fragmented collective West in the near future. Austerity for everyone, except the 0.01% and NATO Wars, not uh, diamonds, uh, um, um, uh, uh, not diamonds forever, which is a play on the title of a James Bond novel by Ian Fleming, and also, I believe, a James Bond film, Diamonds Are Forever, or something like that. So trust Pepe to have cultural references in his pieces. So what do you think of this piece, D?
I just love the way Pepe communicates,
Yeah, I
his
love
way
it.
of words, and
Yeah,
the,
I thought the way he wrote it was terrific. And fun.
yes.
Okay, very much fun.
You got some comments here.
Yep, I do. I have a comment from Wayne Santelban. Let's see, at least one. I have comments, okay, from Evelina that the basic Guantanamo expired, decades ago. The 100-year lease expired, decades ago. By the way, she says that is true, and we're still squatting on Guantanamo, aren't we?
Yeah.
And Wayne Santelban says Russia, USA, definitely in hot war over Ukraine. We just have to pray, hope it uh, doesn't go the way of a real misadventure, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis. We just have to hope we don't have a bunch of Oreshniks falling on U.S. bases in Europe. That would be very difficult for us to reply to. Wayne says Pepe Escobar was the first and only foreign journalist to see some of the destruction done bombing in Yemen. Joe. Yes, Wayne, that's true. We covered the trip of the foreign visitors to Yemen, including Pepe. Uh, the week after they completed their visits, it's some earlier streams that we did. Evelina says Cuban Missile Crisis lasted only days. How long has Ukraine been used as a proxy by the U.S.? Oh, maybe since 2014. In other words, the Maidan coup was in 2014, if you consider that to be the beginning. Please do share, like, and subscribe here, folks. We still have only 31 people, and we've got some pretty good things still coming up for your watching pleasure. So next on the agenda, we have another video from Colonel McGregor.
Oh, good.
This one he did with Fox 11 News, in the Los Angeles area. There's an identification of at the bottom of this of Julie, but there's also a designation somewhere that somebody else was involved in the interview. Yeah, it says in the description, retired Army Colonel Douglas McGregor sits down with Fox 11's Gina Silva to break down the escalating Iran-Israel conflict, its global ripple effects, and what it would mean for the U.S. economy. for a military strategy to market the consequences. So this was a new video today, and it's already gotten 42K views. So I'll start it up right now, and we'll go through it, doing our usual commentary and interruptions.
I think we have to understand three things. First of all, Israel was running out of cash and missiles, and that's the principal reason for the ceasefire. The Israeli economy.
For anyone who needs to restore their vision, this simple change to your breakfast can make all the difference. The video showing the green juice
economy is in ruins. Smotrich, who is the name of the man who's the finance minister, who is probably one of the most violent anti-Palestinian Arabs and advocates for war against Islam everywhere, actually spoke publicly and said, we've got another week, maybe 2 weeks left, and then our economy implodes completely. And then, of course, about a week, I think it's less than a week ago, you had Ben-Gvir, another member of the Netanyahu inner circle who violently hates and wants to destroy Muslims and Arabs. He made the comment that they had underestimated the strength and potential of the Iranian missile arsenal. So I think if you look at those two things and you understand that every time a missile comes in, or a drone or something else, the predisposition is to fire 2 missiles to take it out. So if you
yes, the intention is to fire 2 missiles because the expectation is that you'll need 2 missiles to take it out. But the real truth about that is that depending upon the missile that's coming in and its characteristic, it may either fail to take it out, or if it does succeed, it may take between 2 and 11 missiles to actually take one out. So it's important to realize that it's not always 2 missiles to take something out. Okay, a lot of times it doesn't take anything out, and a lot of other times it takes quite a few more missiles to take something out.
You have 1 missile that costs $1 million that is directed at Israel, and you're going to fire 2 missiles, each of which costs $2 million.
I think the point he's making is a very good one, except I don't think it's entirely accurate in the sense that I don't think Iran spends something like $1 million on its missiles. I think the figure is something closer to 200,000 for its missiles. Now, I'm not sure it's 200,000 for the most sophisticated of its missiles, but the way the Iranians have been working, with the Israelis, is they saturate the area with drones, and missiles that are not as sophisticated and cheaper to strip away the anti-missile capability of the Israelis. And then they come in with the hypersonic missiles, which, never intercepted. And so, insofar as there are missiles that cost $1 million, and I'm not sure there are any, they are never intercepted and may require something like 5 or 10 missiles to attempt to get at them. So you're looking at an expenditure of maybe $20 million worth as low as $200,000 or $500,000. It's really a bad ratio. And I don't think Doug was making as clear as he should have been making how high this ratio is. I mean, the Israelis got stripped of their anti-missile missiles in this 12-day war. I mean, they have nothing left. That's why they had to stop. And I think it's also true that we don't have too many missiles to resupply them with at this point, because they used up just looking at the THAAD missiles that they used. I think they used 2 years production of THAAD missiles to fend off what was fired at them, by Iran. So, I mean, I don't know how the U.S. is going to be able to resupply them, but we'll see.
That means you're spending $4 million to shoot down a $1 million missile. So what you do is you overwhelm the defense. You just send lots and lots and lots of missiles. The Israelis can't possibly stop them all. And on top of that, they're going broke, and they've got ruins everywhere. Haifa and Tel Aviv have sustained serious damage, along with the ports, military installations, airfields. It's a disaster. So the Israelis actually need a ceasefire. Now, does that...
Yeah, so Doug was, the main points he made there were very, very on point, very, very good. He's really on top of that analysis.
That means they're willing to give up their aims and stop the war? No, I don't think so. If there's one thing we can say with absolute certainty, it is that virtually everyone in the region, all the Muslim Arabs, Turks, Persians, have all reached the same conclusion. They cannot coexist with this Jewish state. The Jewish state is dedicated, devoted to their destruction. So they can't coexist with it. So I don't see anything positive emerging anytime soon. I don't see an end to this conflict. I think whatever happens, it'll be a break. And clearly, the Israelis will try to rearm, refit, get ready for the next round. I see no evidence that they're going to give up. Of course, now they have another problem. Millions of people inside Israel are living in very dangerous circumstances, and hundreds of thousands have already left. More are leaving. So have left that they're now buying up vast tracts of real estate on the island of Cyprus. It's gotten so bad that one of the leading politicians on Cyprus spoke yesterday and said, "Stop, we're losing control of our country. The Israelis are buying everything." Well, why are they buying up real estate on Cyprus? Obviously, they plan to move there and live there, not stay in Israel. I think that's the tip of the iceberg. So Israel has a problem with outward immigration, keeping its population where it is. There are only 9 million people in Israel. 2 million are Arabs. The other 7 million are Jews. And the Arabs aren't leaving, they're staying. So numbers of people in the 7 million want to leave and get out of the country and go someplace else. That's not a good sign.
Okay, what say you, D?
No, I was going to say, yeah, the Arabs are going to stay. They're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, they're not going to go anywhere, and the Israelis are going to leave. And the worse it gets for the Israelis, the more they will be looking to leave. Now, whether they'll be able to get out or not, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the wisdom, shown by the Iranians and the Houthis involving the bombing of the Ben Gurion airport, because if you bomb everywhere else, then at least there's somewhere the Israelis can go to get out.
Right, but I think the reason why the airports, I mean, they're thinking about shipments
I know
come into the country.
I know they're thinking about the shipments, and by all means, they ought to concentrate on the military airports. Okay, I think,
Right.
But I still think it would be a good idea to leave the main commercial airport open, so the settlers can go home.
Right, and it depends on who. Like, usually within every situation, the people with money, they leave, and then it's just, the people that don't have the financial ability are the ones that have to endure the brunt.
Right,
Of
but
everything.
if you want 750,000 settlers to leave,
Right.
which I think is should be the real goal here, And
Yes.
you have to provide them with a way to get out. If they don't have a way to get out, then as much as they hate it, they're just going to stay.
I think some of them have gone over to what, to Cyprus, and then
Yeah, I know, but
take
that's like,
off.
I think that's something like 14 or 15,000 people.
Right. No,
I think more of the Israelis have probably already gone to Greece itself.
right. And then also, I think some of them went and left through Egypt. So who knows? I know what your point is, but I guess they look to other ways if they can't get out through the airport.
They look to other ways, but they're more likely to leave if you make it easy for them.
Right.
It's similar to Ukraine's position. In fact, I think Zelensky and Netanyahu are in similar positions right now. Ukraine has lost millions of people that have left the country. They have at least 1.5 million dead soldiers. Now, Israel doesn't have that many dead, but large numbers of people have left. More are likely to go. So
Okay, Doug variously estimates it, the fatalities, as between 1.5 million and 1.7 million. He is the person who is currently giving the highest estimates for fatalities among the Ukrainians. Okay, I don't think anybody else is as high as he is, but I would not be at all surprised if he is right about that.
I don't see anything happening to resolve the fundamental conflict that is raging between Israel and in fact, the entire Middle East.
I've got a brand new fridge on wheels that keeps your food ice cold without ever needing ice. It may look.
He's very dependent upon donors in the United States who are huge supporters of the Israel lobby. He would not be in office today if it were not for them. So I don't see much evidence that he's prepared to abandon Israel, but I know that he has resisted being pulled directly into the war. These strikes that you just saw fell on empty buildings, targets where there was neither people nor technology. And the Iranians were told we were coming, we were going to bomb these sites. So they got out and they didn't turn on their radars. They didn't fire any air defense missiles. And then subsequently, the next day, they informed us that they were going to strike one of our bases in Bahrain. And we had already evacuated everyone from the base in Bahrain. And so they destroyed it, but no one was killed. Iran does not want to go to war with us. Neither does Russia, neither does China or anyone else. No one wants to go to war with us. That's not because they're just all living in.
Okay, so I would kind of double check which base was attacked by Iran. Okay, the impression I had was that it was the air base in Qatar they attacked, the main air base. The Americans were warned about that, and they got everybody out, and nobody died. But the word is from a number of sources that the amount of physical damage that was done to the main air base of the United States in the Middle East, the Qatar Air Base, was very, very considerable. And that actually the Iranian air attack was much more successful in that sense, than the attacks by the Americans and the Israelis on the nuclear sites were. But we'll know more about the damage to the nuclear sites, in the coming weeks. I think so far the verdict is that the damage to those sites was actually pretty superficial.
Fear. War is stupid. It's bad for business. It destroys property. It ruins lives. So they don't want a war with us, but they're stuck with this Israeli state that has made war on them. In the middle sits Donald Trump, who wants to do everything he can for Israel, but doesn't really want to be at war with the world for Israel.
What was your reaction when you found out that the US had actually bombed those nuclear sites?
Well, I was skeptical at first, and then I began to wonder how this could happen. And it took some time before I detected that it was really a PR stunt. It was not a serious military operation. And whenever you hear politicians say, our men in uniform are the greatest and our armed forces are great and we owe them, you immediately step back and say, wait a minute, I smell something wrong here. And I think that's what we have to understand. Every politician stands up and distracts people by talking about how great the military is to get them off the subject they don't want to address. The truth is we hit nothing. We spent $100 million to hit nothing. We flew all these aircraft, put all those ships over there. So the question is, what happens next? Do they sit there in perpetuity trying to prevent Israel from being destroyed? Or do they leave? Will there be an agreement? Is an agreement even possible? I'm not sure it is.
So what military posture would you advise President Trump to take?
Well, I would advise it. I would not have struck anything. Obviously, everybody thinks that was a brilliant move, and it's a demonstration, not a serious military attack. I think at this point, I think he's made the right decision to back away. I think we should make it abundantly clear that we are not going to attack Iran under any circumstances unless they directly respond to Israel. In other words, if they attack Israel. Now, if the Israelis attack them again, as they did in the past, in other words, they start the war, we can't absolutely blame the Iranians for not responding. The real challenge is that what do you do with Israel? What do you do with all its billionaire donors that are holding you hostage to support for Israel? How do you convince them that it's in the interest of the Israeli people to end this war? See, from the very beginning, when this whole thing started, my greatest concern was the Israelis are on a suicidal path. 9 million versus 92 million. And the 92 million, contrary to popular belief, are not ignorant peasants that know nothing. Who are we kidding? This is a new world. This isn't 46 years ago. We have to recognize that we're not alone on this planet as a superpower. There are other nations that are very capable, have talented populations that can produce real military power. So he really has to get Israel out of the business of attacking its neighbors. He's got the Egyptian army sitting on the Israeli border right now, ready to pounce. They're waiting to see what happens next. Nobody likes the Israelis. Nobody wants the Israelis. Everybody hates the Israelis. How do you change that?
Your statements are very provocative. Do you fear that you could be labeled anti-Semitic?
Oh, sure. Everybody that stands up and counters the narrative, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're evil, you're this, whatever. Come on, listen, I'm no longer concerned about that sort of thing. I think, number one, I'm worried about the United States. I'm worried about America. And I think that was something else that was on Trump's mind. And he was worried what would happen if they disrupted the oil flow out of the Persian Gulf. And he should be concerned about that, even though that won't affect us immediately as much as it will the rest of the world. That could have a terrible effect on the global economy. And our economy is weak. We're in a very delicate position right now. Our financial system is very fragile. Look at the NVIDIA sell-off. I mean, we could sit here for hours and talk about all the things that are happening. Nassim Taleb, the man who wrote the book Black Swan, who tries to talk about the consequences of our sovereign national debt and mishandling of finances, he's pointed out that gold is now the true reserve currency. Oh, there are countries.
Okay.
I know, right?
I see a lot of people buying gold, but I don't see people using gold to pay for oil or using gold to pay for weapons. So I know they're buying gold for all kinds of purposes. I think some of them are crazy. Okay, but as yet, gold is not being used as a currency. I mean, that's a fact. It used to be used as a currency. It's not yet being used as a currency today. So I think we have to keep that in mind.
That will do business in dollars, but the dollar is no longer seen as a store of value.
It's true that the dollar, is not seen okay, as the store of value it was seen as some years ago. That's because we've had a greater amount of inflation. Okay, but the only function of a currency is not as a store of value. In other words, the main function of a currency is to serve as a medium of exchange. And as I just said, gold is not being used as a medium of exchange.
Now we have the Germans and the Italians who want 145 billion in gold returned to them. And people are waiting to see that happen. Do we have the gold? There are all sorts of terrible things that can happen to us, far worse than anything going on in the Middle East. And I think President Trump does appreciate that. But the real problem here is, what do you do about Netanyahu and his government? Because if he recovers at all, gets more equipment, more ammunition, more missiles, they will go back at it again. There's no alternative as far as they're concerned. Can we have snap elections in Israel? Can a new government come to power there? Let's say a new government does and takes a different approach. Will anybody believe them? By the way, will anybody believe us anymore? I mean, we've lied about so many things to so many people for so many years now. It's hard to think, it's hard to imagine fashioning a solution that anybody would have faith or confidence in.
Does Iran pose a threat to the United States?
No.
Okay, just to, stop it there. There are so many things that Doug has said so far, in this video that are absolutely right on. I mean, he's off on the financial details, of course, as I said. But when he's talking about the wars, what things are likely to do, what the realities of the wars are, I mean, he's right on the money.
Mm-hmm.
He's telling us what is actually going on, and he's not putting a veneer on it.
No.
Okay, and it's effective because, it's coming from someone who's obviously a Republican, and who's obviously a conservative. I mean, he may be a Teddy Roosevelt type of a Republican, or somebody like that, a throwback to the 19th century, in a certain sense. Okay, but he's not an imperialist, and he's not a warmonger. He's trying to end the wars. And he's telling us what the realities are in these various countries and what to expect of him. And his analysis of the motives of the Israelis is, it's right on.
It never has. And its nuclear development was never aimed at a weapon, contrary to popular belief. Now, what they have done is they have moved all the uranium enrichment centrifuges and other technologies to other locations. Not sure we know where they are, but they're somewhere else. Now, could they build a bomb? I suppose they could, but they recently announced that they refuse to leave the non-proliferation treaty environment. In other words, they've said we're not going to violate the NPT. And in fact, the argument for many years has been, well, why can't we have a nuclear-free zone? Well, because of Israel. But Israel won't even admit to having nuclear weapons, but we know they've got at least 300 warheads. Well, what stops Israel from using those weapons? Because I think the Israelis know that if they use one of those weapons now, a similar weapon will be used against them. It will arrive somewhere, somehow, from somebody. I don't think the Russians or the Chinese, Pakistanis, anybody in the Muslim world, they're not going to simply stand by and watch Israel pulverize Iran into submission and subjugation. Certainly not with nuclear weapons. So what do we do from here?
That's an interesting statement. I tend to agree with that. I think if the Israelis were to do a surprise attack on Iran with nuclear weapons, I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians replied by destroying Israel. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Russians deliver. I don't even know if they deliver a nuclear weapon. I think what they'd use is 5 of the Oreshniks and destroy all the major population centers of the Israelis and just destroy their whole society. It said they've got 300 Oreshniks right now that they're not using.
Are we going to treat Israel as a normal state and tell them that there are some alternatives, but we're not going to support whatever they do in the future? I don't think so, but we'll see.
And why is that?
My name is Yulia, call sign Kuba. I have been fighting for Ukraine's independence since 2014.
Why can't the United States, which is a bigger power?
Well, you just explained it. You just told me. So aren't you worried about being called an anti-Semite? Anybody who suggests that anything should be different with Israel is immediately an anti-Semite. If you're somebody like Professor Jeffrey Sachs, well, then you are scorned as a so-called self-loathing Jew. I mean, the ad hominem attacks always indicate that there's no argument. When you start attacking people on the basis of their race, on the basis of their, social standing, their political views, you've lost the argument. And that's what's going on. So anybody who stands up and says, we need to do business with Israel differently, the Israelis need to take a different approach, well, then you must be an anti-Semite, because the Israelis can only have one approach that gives them dominance.
So does Jeff Sachs look like a self-hating Jew to you? He doesn't look like a self-hating person at all.
No.
He looks like a very, very measured person, completely on top of his game. There are millions of Jews out there who don't approve of what Israel is doing, and we are not self-hating Jews. We are proud of being Jewish, and we're proud of the heritage of Judaism, and that small part of the heritage that relates to Amalek. Well, the Bible is a big book. It's got a lot of different things in it. You can prove anything with the Bible. I mean, if you randomly select, or not even randomly select, if you systematically suggest or extract sections of the Bible to support a particular position, you can support, self-contradictory positions. And as anybody who has studied logic knows, if a group is holding propositions that are self-contradictory, then any conclusion at all can be drawn from the contradictions.
Right.
I mean, that's just a logical rule. So some jerks, can justify genocide on the basis of some passages from the Bible, but other people can deduce the exact opposite, complete opposition to genocide, using other passages, from the Bible.
Right.
Okay, so who are you going to listen to? Don't base your politics on the Bible at all.
Exactly. And I was going to say, I read that when early Christians were, when they were coming over to the U.S., I guess the dispensationalists, I don't know if there was dispensationalists back then, no, but the early Christians that were coming over, they used that argument of Amalek, that they were to bring Christianity over and get rid of the Amaleks, which were the natives.
Yes, the Indians.
Yeah. It's like the same script.
Yeah, it's ridiculous and harmful and evil.
Right. They saw themselves as superior and looked at the others, the people here, in the same way when it comes to Israel and the Palestinians.
Yes. Oh, and the Puritans who came over here, by the way, they also thought they were the chosen people.
Yes.
I mean, they had a chosen people complex as well.
Right.
So,
And they were being led, yes.
yes.
That one book that has been used for colonialism and just evil.
For colonialism, for evil, it's been used for many good things too.
Right.
It's a self-contradictory book.
Right.
Supremacy, hegemony in the region. Israel has to change its approach if it has any chance whatsoever of surviving in the region. You know, this is not a Bruce Lee movie. Israel is not Bruce Lee and defeats the 52 people that show up in the span of 60 seconds behind the whatever it is, the green screen or blue screen. In other words, this is real life. If they want to live in this part of the world, they're going to have to alter their views. Ever since the 7th of October, over a year ago, they spent all of their time telling everyone that they were subhuman, Amalek, animals that deserve to be slaughtered. So if you're an Arab who lives in the Emirates or Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Algeria, wherever you are, you're Amalek. What a terrible thing. How do you recover from that?
Okay, what I have to add here is that if you follow the Bible, here are the self-contradictions. Okay, if you follow the Bible, the Arabs, okay, are descendants of Abraham also, as much as the Jews. So therefore, they can't be Amalek, because they're descendants of Abraham, right?
Right.
So there's a there's a self-contradiction right there.
You have to renounce that. You have to reject it. It's contemptible. I don't know if that can be done.
Donald's coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here.
President Trump is a brilliant marketer. He's a marketing genius. This is someone who could sell snow to Eskimos, okay? He does that very well. It's not very meaningful. This is somebody who said, well, I closed the border. I built this great wall, and I'm making the Mexicans pay for it. How did that go? Not very well.
Get a new job, loser!
We're supposedly restoring the rule of law, and we're supposed to deport people that don't belong here, that came in. How's that going? We're not deporting very many people because we're not organized to do it. We have no strategy. We have no plan. In other words, there's a lot of bombast, but there's not a lot of evidence for systematic planning and execution. So I think what you're getting right now is that President Trump sat there and said, wait a minute, do I want the Straits of Hormuz to close? Am I going to let this war go on and potentially spread? I just got off the phone with President Putin, and he listened to him. And who knows what was actually said there. I think he made it pretty clear, that is Putin, that they would stand by Iran. And so he said, whoops, I've got to intervene in this and stop this somehow.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.
So he imposed a ceasefire. But now what? Have you heard the now what? I haven't heard the now what.
And Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. If that happens, what will that mean to the American public?
Well, initially, we're going to watch the rest of the world struggle with that because they're more dependent upon the oil that comes out of there, especially China, Japan, Korea. The Koreans and Japanese were supposed to come as observers to the NATO conference, and they have both said, no, we're not coming. The Asians think we've lost our minds. As soon as we bombed in Iran, they thought we've lost our minds. They're not interested in war. They don't want war. They want stability, they want predictability, and they want peace. So they see us as erratic and dangerous.
What a crowd.
The Trump supporters may think this is wonderful and President Trump is being tough. But the real question is, what happens after you bomb? And what's happening? Well, a ceasefire. What does that really mean? How long will that last? What will it produce? What is it designed to accomplish? Is this an opportunity for people to meet and talk over what can be rectified? I don't think Witkoff is going to be taken seriously anymore by the Iranians under any circumstances.
Yeah, I think he's dead right about that. he's going to have to come in with somebody else. Because Witkoff, as good as he appeared to be at the start, he allowed himself to be the tool of a surprise attack. How can the Iranians even begin to sit down with him again?
Exactly.
I don't think it's going to happen.
No.
Part of the big deception plan to get the Iranians to sit around at the table and believe there was some hope for a negotiated settlement. I don't think the Russians are going to take Witkoff seriously at all because of his connectivity to the same kind of problem in Ukraine. So, I just don't know the answer. Everybody says, well, tell us the answer. What's happening? I'm not Nostradamus. I wish that I were. But my point is that I don't see any long-term strategic thinking yet. I see no plan for any kind of resolution. That has to present itself. Or this ceasefire will be used to refit, reorganize, replenish, and Netanyahu will continue to do in the future what he's done in the past. And that means that Iran will go back to the barricades and fight.
So there's a lot of talk about Iran having internal crisis.
Before we talk about the Iran internal crisis, because that, of course, is BS, but Doug will tell us that in just a minute. But I think the point here is that if Iran goes back and fights, next time they're going to be a lot stronger than this time. Not only will they introduce some weapons that are more advanced, because I'm sure they didn't use all the things that they had ready, but also they're getting S-400 systems from China. By the time the Israelis are ready to attack again, which Doug thinks will be sometime in September, and I'm not sure it's even going to be able to be September, because I just think resupplying the Israelis with weapons is going to take some time. Now, the Israelis can come in with offensive weapons, okay, and not have a resupply of any of their defensive weapons at all. But if they do that, then the slaughter of Israelis will just continue without any opposition. That's what will happen if the Israelis attack again in September. If the Israelis wait until their own defense is shored up, by that time, okay, I think the Iranians will have an air defense that's so strong that the Israelis won't be able to make a dent in it. Meanwhile, I don't think the Israelis will have an answer to the hypersonic missiles. The hypersonic missiles will still be beating their air defenses, even if they get a resupply of the same weapons. I mean, if the Aegis and the THAAD, okay, and the Iron Dome, David Sling, if you get a resupply of the anti-missile missiles in those particular systems, why would they be able to work any better a second time, than they did the first time? There's only one thing I know that might give the Israelis an advantage. The Israelis have been working on a weapon, known as the Iron Beam. Okay, it's a laser weapon, and they used it a little bit, a year ago, but it wasn't ready for the field then. They had to withdraw it. Now, some people are saying in the background that maybe the Iron Beam will be ready in a short time. Maybe that would make a difference. Okay, I don't know. But I have a feeling that with all the missiles, Iran has, the Iron Beam would be overloaded also, because the power requirements for using it are very, very substantial. And the Iranians would still be flooding the zone, and I think they would break the Iron Beam defense also. But I freely admit my expertise in that area is not very strong.
Do you believe that maybe leadership will change because of everything that's going on?
No, in fact, the opposite is the case. If you wanted to strengthen the government in Iran, you just did all that you could possibly do. This may come as a surprise to many people, but most people, most of the time, prefer their own government, even if they don't like everybody in it, to somebody else's government.
That's
Now,
true.
the Israelis apparently recruited, cultivated, and set up the former Shah's son to come in, ride in as the savior for Iran, to be their puppet, because that's the way the Iranians look at it. What a terrible thing to do.
Guys, if you suffer from neuropathy, stop drinking cold water now. I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but this.
The Iranians are absolutely 100% backing their government at this point. They're rounding up everybody and their brother who sold out to the Mossad for money and executing them. If anything, the so-called evil mullahs that everybody hoped to get rid of are now more in power than ever before. And by the way, Iran today bears very little resemblance to the Iran of 46 years ago. But Americans don't know that because the Israelis and their supporters in this country have created the illusion that Iran is unchanged from what it was 46 years ago. And it has changed profoundly. I talked just last night with some Iranians, and they mentioned something I thought was profoundly interesting. They had been in Qom, Q-O-M. This is a city that is the theological center of Shia Islam. And they had been there during Ramadan. They had come from an Arab country, from Egypt, in fact, flown in there. And they were shocked because in Egypt, everyone was observing Ramadan, which means that you fast from morning until sunset. Nobody paid any attention to it whatsoever. Women were not running around in bags. They didn't have all their heads covered. In fact, it looked like a European city. So Iran is different from what we think it is.
Your advice to Americans who may be extremely concerned about a possibility of World War III.
There will be no World War III if we don't want one, because no one wants World War III against us. So forget it. We need to stop resorting to military power as the first option in diplomacy. We have to begin to let the rest of the world live as it sees fit. We have to understand that we're part of a larger world. And great states like Iran, these are ancient civilizational states. So is Turkey. So is India. So is China. So is Russia. We have to respect them. We have to treat other people's national security interests as legitimate. We expect them to treat our interests in their countries as legitimate. This is a very strange situation, but we refuse to accept the truth that they too have legitimate security interests at home. And then secondly, I would say we have a lot of problems. You're in Los Angeles. You know what it's like. We have serious problems inside the United States. We need to deal with those. And that's not what we're doing, but that's what we all voted for President Trump to do. He has to come home. We need to bring our troops home. We're going to need them inside the United States. But that's not happening right now. It should, but it hasn't.
People come to us and their teeth are so bad that they all need to be extracted. They all need to be taken out and they need to get.
So that's it. That's it for that one. I thought it was a great statement of, the way Doug looks at the Iran-Israel, U.S. war. And I thought there was a lot of wisdom in that. Okay, Dee, you got any comments?
I had heard the same as he heard, and so many reports of the unity in Iran, and also with big time going after anyone associated with Mossad. So they're really strengthened. Things have, people are sticking together and they want to get rid of the problems.
Yes, they are, and they're sticking together.
Yes.
That's really the important point.
Yes.
They're sticking together very strongly.
And then also what he brought up too, with the Western media portraying Iran as backwards, and some saying Stone Age and all this other nonsense. That it just shows the ignorance that the U.S. Israel went into a situation with complete ignorance.
Yeah, when it comes to physics, okay, engineering, chemistry, the sciences in general, and engineering, okay, in particular, and mathematics, the Iranians are very, very good. In fact, I knew some Iranians here in the 1960s who were working here, and they were working in scientific fields.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very, very good back then in the 1960s. It's been 60 years, since then. I think but some of the universities in Iran are great universities, and the engineering schools are terrific, and they turn out engineers that are first class. And those people are very helpful when it comes to armaments, and when it comes to war, and when it comes to missilery especially. And that's why their missiles are so effective at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So Wayne Santleman says, evilly upon 2014, the color revolution actually happened when Yanukovych was ousted to install the U.S. puppet. Actually, Zelensky was not installed in 2014. Okay, I believe Zelensky was elected relatively recently, like in something like 2019 or 2020, and he was elected to be the president of Ukraine. He ran on a peace platform, saying that he would be very friendly to Russia. And then, of course, when he got into power, he completely changed around and lined up, with the U.S. program for Ukraine. Okay, but it's true that Ukraine became a puppet regime of the United States after the revolution of 2014, and has been such a puppet regime since that time.
And also, too, is that Zelensky refuses elections now. That he's really not considered legally the president there.
Yes, because he set up a dictatorship.
Yes.
And he canceled elections. Okay, and the press has been controlled there for a very long time now. Okay, the political parties are strictly limited to parties that support the regime. I'm sure it's correct to say Ukraine is much less a democracy than Russia itself is. I know Russia is supposed to be this authoritarian system, with Putin as the dictator. Okay, but mostly Putin rules by consensus, and there are lots of levels of decision making inside of Russia, and it in no way is the kind of dictatorship that Ukraine is at this point. We are defending a dictatorship, against a regime that is allowing a considerable amount of freedom for its citizens. That's the truth of the matter. Wayne Santleman finishes his comments saying he is their liability to garnering any peace deal. He is the major liability opposing any peace deal. That's right. Wayne says, my understanding, 30% arsenal was used around 12-day war, so they have plenty of their arsenal for a resumption of hostilities. And yes, and they will be adding to that also. And their manufacturing capability to add to their arsenal and their trading capability to add to their arsenal, especially in the area of defensive systems, is much greater than our capability to add to the Israeli arsenal. At this point, the Iranians can outproduce us in the weapons that matter, specifically the hypersonic missiles, also the ballistic missiles. They can produce them faster than we can produce them. Wayne says a 15 million communications tower was taken out at the Qatar Air Base. Yes, it was. Antonio Calho says, thank you. And Mr. Wonderful says, hello, everyone. Hello, friend. Hello, Mr. Wonderful. You come in just in time for the final video of the evening, which we will now share. And that is a video of Danny Haifong conversing with Larry Johnson and Colonel Wilkerson, Larry Wilkerson. And here it is. Let me get it in full screen, and we'll take it from the beginning.
With Russia, we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. They call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means. As you know, we've spent $350 billion approximately on this war with Russia and Ukraine. I would like to see it end. It wasn't my war. It was Biden's war. It's not my war. I'm trying to get you out of it. And we want to see it end. And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to be there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple.
Despite Donald Trump's claim that he is about ending the war, even as he is talking about secondary tariffs on Russia's trading partner, here is what he also had to say during this meeting regarding weapons to Ukraine.
Everything. It's Patriots. It's all of them. It's a full complement with the batteries.
And when do you expect them to arrive in Ukraine, sir?
Well, we're going to have some come very soon, within days, actually. There's a couple of the countries that have Patriots are going to swap over and will replace the Patriots with the ones they have. We have one country that has 17 Patriots getting ready to be shipped. They're not going to need them for them.
What is your reaction to what appears to be now, even rhetorically, a shift in Donald Trump's posture on Ukraine?
If you listened to Trump before that meeting, you were expecting a noise the size of a nuclear blast. And when he finished, you realized all you heard was a mouse fart. I mean, it was...
Did he say a mouse fart?
Yes. Never heard that before.
Oh, I've heard that quite a number of times, but not from Larry Johnson before. But it's very consistent with Larry Johnson.
It was a joke. Number one, here's this big plan that NATO, who we largely control, is going to buy from us weapon systems that we're not sure we can produce or even supply. That is a great plan.
That is Larry telling the truth.
Because right off the bat, the way that they're going to come up with the money is either the Europeans are going to have to take it from the frozen Russian accounts, which will then set off an even bigger economic backlash on Europe, or they're going to actually have to come up with the money out of their own pockets, and their credit cards are already maxed out. They don't have any excess cash to free up, but go ahead and do that. And then
Okay, the Europeans do have credit cards that are masked out because if they're members of the EU, which they all are,
Hmm.
then they're not currency sovereigns. Their currency, okay, is the EU currency, and the nations of Europe are not able to create their own currency, and they're limited by the agreement to deficits of 3% per year. And so they're not able to rearm without cutting into the social safety nets in their various countries. If they try to cut into the social safety nets in their various countries, their governments are going to be replaced because there is no enthusiasm for a war with Russia. There's been
No.
an attack by Russia on Europe, okay, in the nations of Europe. The Europeans have already been undergoing suffering due to events like the destruction of the pipeline, Nord Stream pipeline. Okay, and also due to the fact that the Europeans are already spending too much on armaments and things like that, and have been giving too much aid to Ukraine, to their detriment of their social safety nets. The Europeans have great social safety nets, and they love them, and they don't want to see them, go away. There's going to be considerable anger, and the regimes are getting displaced. We're seeing currently the turmoil, okay, in England with the regime of Keir Starmer, about to fall. What Starmer's been doing is he's been making plans to reunite, with the EU. And he's been running austerity programs, since he's taken over. And he's been sending a lot of aid, okay, to Ukraine. That has made him very popular. I'm sorry, very unpopular. Okay, and I think the Brits are on the point of replacing him. And I think it's going to be even worse for the other nations of Europe because the Brits do have the capability to run deficits as large as they want. They are a currency sovereign. Okay, but the nations of the EU are not. I'm
That
sure
was so stupid. That was so stupid to give up, their sovereignty.
I know it was so stupid to give up their currency sovereignty. It was. So I think we're going to see quick changes, especially in France, okay, and in Germany, okay, in the coming months, if the governments try to cut the safety nets in order to get more money for the aid, okay, of Ukraine. I don't think the Europeans want to fight that war, anymore. But here are all the regimes lining up to support it. I don't think the voters are going to agree. And I think, there's going to be regime change in Germany and regime change in France and regime change, in the Netherlands also and in Brussels, okay, itself. I don't know whether the Italians are going to escape it. I think Giorgia Meloni is a little more flexible than, some of the other, Europeans. So she may escape it. Okay, you have some of the Eastern European countries that are certainly in disagreement with the Russia policies of the West European countries. And there's going to be pressure for them to change the rulers in their countries also. I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the policy of Europe. I think there's no way they're going to get to 5% of GDP for arms. And there's no way they're going to support a war with Russia.
Weapon systems. So So Trump right there said 17 Patriot missile batteries. Okay, so each battery carries, fires 16 missiles that, and we'll go into that in just a second. But so just start doing the math, because total U.S. inventory of all Patriot missile batteries right now is between 50 and 60. So essentially, he's committing to giving or selling a third to Ukraine when Israel's demanding it, Taiwan's demanding it, South Korea's demanding it. So we've got all these other demands out there that, we've got demand that exceeds supply. And then just the operational use of these missile batteries. Let's say that he is sending 17. That means those 17 will carry a minimum of, 160. So a minimum of about 280 missiles, because, 16 missiles per unit. Well, when you've got an inbound Russian drone, a Garand drone, or a ballistic missile, each Patriot missile battery has to fire a minimum of 2, and more often it's been like 4. So if Russia fires 4 missiles and or the Garand drones, that means they will use up all the missiles that came with that one launcher. Well, that means you've got to come up with, you make sure that they have more than just 16 available per launcher. Maybe you want to say, let's have enough so a launcher could fire 4 times at that. Well, there's the problem. Lockheed Martin only makes 700 of those maximum per year. The number is closer to 600. Russia, over the last 5 of the last 6 days, has fired each day in excess of 500 missiles and drones into Ukraine. So what Trump is offering is a Band-Aid for an arterial wound. It's a symbolic gesture, means nothing.
What was?
Of course, okay, he's right. Okay, if you did, well, how much did it come?
How much?
16 missiles by 17 batteries is actually 272 missiles. If you divide by an average of 4, then at most, if they were successful, those batteries would amount to shooting down 68 of the Russian missiles. That's all they'd get, 68. Okay, the recent attacks by Russia, they're firing hundreds of missiles a night. I mean, this will have no effect on the war at all. It is purely symbolic. It's expensive symbolism also.
What nation is this that's going to give the 17 Patriot missiles and their batteries, as he says? Do you have any idea?
Well, let's just look at Trump's situation right now. MAGA is sundering even as he pontificates.
Okay, Colonel Wilkerson, the former assistant to Secretary of State Powell, okay, at the time of the Iraq Wars. Okay, he's a brilliant, strategic analyst himself. He's been a professor at William and Mary since, he retired, from the military, which I forget when he retired. It was something like 2006 or 2007. He's been a professor since then. He's a professor emeritus now. He's a great analyst, great analyst, and an honest man, very honest man. He's a man of great character. He also happens to be a Republican, I have to. Okay, he was someone who came out of the Bush administrations, especially not the second Bush administration, but the first Bush administration. Okay, he very much disagreed with the second Bush administration. Okay, but he's now extremely anti-war. And when there are peace demonstrations in Washington, D.C., Larry gets out in the street, even though he's 80 years old.
And by the way, to sit there with the least sharp knife in Brussels scabbard, Mark Rutte, even less sharp than Jim Stoltenberg, is just pathetic. But Trump has to put his base back together. His base is split. Not only the interview Tucker Carlson did with regard to Epstein and that affair, which is just devastating for MAGA right now, ricocheting all across the country, up and down and all across, but other things that he's not fulfilled his promises on, not least of which is to end the war in Ukraine, are taking his polls and devastating him. He's got to worry now about whether or not he can maintain any kind of contact with the base from now on, other than those morons in it like Lindsey Graham, who are salivating at this prospect of his base falling apart, but at the same time doing it for ulterior reasons, such as continuing the war in Ukraine, going back to war with Iran, and so forth. So Trump's political situation right now is devastatingly bad. And he's got to do something about it. So what does he do? He comes up and he has these press conferences and he delivers these promises that he's never going to fulfill. And that even if he were able to fulfill, there aren't enough, as Larry's pointed out, weapons out there and CIAs and MI6s and Mossads to garner the selling of them and the transfer of them and so forth to make a difference. So what are you talking about, Mr. President, other than nonsense? And why are you saying it? You're saying it because you sense that you're in trouble. And look for more like this. Look for a string of comments like this. Look for more Bundy and Trump's getting together and saying, for example, that, oh, no, there was no list. There's no problem there. We're not going to look into this. There's absolutely nothing to it. Meanwhile, his principal spokesperson for a long time and close friend and confidant, Tucker Carlson, is not only holding interviews on Epstein and the doings, but also just held an interview with the president of Iran. Tucker's devastating Donald Trump, whom he professes in every interview to still love and treasure. But Trump has gone astray, badly astray, and he's in trouble.
Do you have any idea what Western nation this could be that's going to offer these weapons? You know, the EU top foreign diplomat, whatever she's called, Ms. Callas, said that actually it's Europe that's going to be paying for all of this. So actually it's not U.S. support. So who is this mystery country that's going to be essentially doing the U.S.'s dirty work?
I don't have a clue. In fact, I don't think the country exists, candidly. Europe economically is in deep trouble right now.
So Larry is saying Trump is such a big liar that country doesn't even exist. Contemplate that for a moment. And I think Larry's right. That country doesn't even exist. Trump made it up out of whole cloth.
Germany is experience a recession. They don't want to call it that, but that's what they're experiencing. Same for England. France, I believe, is just it's barely growing. It's stagnant. So they don't have more money coming in. There's just been actually a study published out of the UK that the quality of life, the wealth of the people is declining, not increasing. So at a time when they're suffering significant domestic pressure to try to deal with domestic issues in each of those countries, these obsessed leaders are showing up wanting to take their money and spend it, send it to the United States to buy military equipment that candidly doesn't work. The United States doesn't have enough of anything of any quality that would change the picture on the ground. And so I'm just here looking, I got the number for you. Yeah, the the total cost, catch this, for each of those missiles, if the United States supplied 17 missile batteries, the 16 PAC-3 missiles would cost basically $2 trillion. Okay? So
Europe doesn't have $2 trillion to give to the United States without cutting deeply into its social safety nets.
It's a number that nobody can afford that. And we don't have the.
Okay, the UK can afford it because it's a currency sovereign. The problem with the UK is they don't act like a currency sovereign. They still act like they're members of the EU, okay, and they're limited in the deficit spending that they can incur. And that's the weird part of it. The Socialist Party, okay, in the UK, the Labour Party, supposedly a socialist party, believes in austerity economics, which is a good reason why the UK people are currently flocking to Jeremy Corbyn's new party, which doesn't even have a name yet. It's a party being founded by Jeremy Corbyn and what's her name? Zoe Saldana. They're starting it. I guess they're going to have the support of George Galloway also. Should be interesting. But it does look like the next Prime Minister of UK is going to be Nigel Farage, who's a right sort of libertarian guy. It's going to be interesting to watch him operate.
Production. So this is the one thing that Ukraine needs that might, and I emphasize might, make a difference on the battlefield is trained reserves, but they don't have them. All they have are the guys that have been quickly press gang into service and thrown in as fresh meat on the front. And whereas Russia is in a far different position, where its numbers, it's been recruiting upwards of 50,000 people volunteering, not being coerced, not being drug off the street. And they get to go into a training regimen. So they'll spend, 2-3 months in basic training and then advanced individual training. Then they get assigned to units and they learn how to work with the integration of forces, of combining drone operations with armored movement, with the infantry movement. Ukraine doesn't have that luxury, and they are paying a terrible human price. If you notice, over the last 4 weeks, each week there's been an exchange of bodies between Ukraine and Russia. Dead Russian soldiers being given to Ukraine, dead Ukrainians being given back to Ukraine by the Russian soldiers. The numbers are staggering in terms of Russia's not getting any bodies because, they haven't had any killed that Ukraine has been able to recover territory. Whereas each week it's in, 6,000, a significant number every week. And that just shows where the losses are taking place, because it means Russia's killing them and they continue to advance, and Ukraine's in no position to recover.
And we have to add here that it just has, been announced that Russia is throwing 160,000 more troops into the war. Completely fresh troops, of course, thoroughly trained, have been in training for some time, and they're about to take the field in what looks like it's going to be Russia's final offensive. In other words, there's going to be an attempt at a big arrow final offensive now to end the war quickly.
Bodies.
Fred, run those presses over there. Yeah, $100 bills. Yeah, $1,000 bills too. That's where we get the money.
I mean, look at just how Trump is talking about Vladimir Putin during.
Okay, the reply to that is that that's not something the Europeans can do, because the EU says they can do only, each nation can do only 3% of deficit spending. So unless the EU changes its rules, there isn't going to be any way for the EU to meet the targets of 5% over a period of years before their own regimes are destroyed because they're so unpopular for the people that they just fall. Okay, while I think Larry's comments could be on the mark for the United States, we could have the money. That's not a problem. Also, the British could have the money if they wanted to, but the rest of the European countries can't have it. Not without changing the EU or getting out of the EU. That's their choice.
During this conference, despite all of what Larry just said.
I don't want to say he's an assassin, but he's a tough guy. It's been proven over the years. He's fooled a lot of people. He fooled Bush. He fooled a lot of people. He fooled Clinton, Bush, Obama, Biden. He didn't fool me. But what I do say is that at a certain point, ultimately talk doesn't talk. It's got to be action.
Colonel Wilkerson, what explains this hubris? I mean, given all that Larry just outlined.
Well, he didn't fool me. He made a fool of me. That's essentially what he should be saying. And I go back to his political problems to give some background. But let me back up and tell you where I think we are right now, because I think it is very, very serious. And Americans need to begin to get a grasp of this. If you'll pick up a little jewel of a treatise written by John Maynard Keynes called The Economic Consequences of the Peace, and remember Keynes was the economic guru at the Versailles Conference, closing out World.
So that's the second time tonight we've been hearing about the economic consequences of the peace. Remember it was mentioned by Pepe Escobar. So the word is going around among these people who all are connected through the judges' programs and NEMA, Al-Rashid's program. They're all running in a group now. So once somebody suggests we got to pay attention to Keynes again and the economic consequences of the peace, then the others will, okay, let's look up the economic consequences of the peace again and see what it says. So that's what's going on here.
War One, you will read a quintessentially beautiful expose of where we are today. Only it's his digression into how we got into Versailles. In other words, how we got into World War One. Making it short, the way we got in there is Britain and France were so eager to get into a war to stop Germany's meteoric rise to the top, beating both of them combined in almost every element of economic and technocratic success, that we got into the war. Didn't take the Archduke getting assassinated or automatic timetables of mobilization or whatever. Britain and France were utterly intent on war. When they came to the peace conference, they were utterly intent on continuing what they'd started with World War One, which is what Maynard Keynes really goes into in this book. And what that was, of course, was what they were trying to do with the actual war. That was restore their own empires. That's a very important phrase, restore their own empires, because Germany principally was threatening them majorly. So what did they do? They fashioned the peace so that 20 years later, they go back to that enterprise and try it again. Well, it failed catastrophically. Neither restored their empires. In fact, despite Churchill's valiant efforts to the contrary, they destroyed the biggest one of them, the British. Fast forward. Where is that situation relevant today? We are already in, mark my words, we are already in World War III. We're in the opening stages of World War III. And this war is going to be fought. And it will be fought, whether it starts in Southwest Asia, in the Arctic, or continues in Ukraine and spreads or whatever. It will be fought in order to stop the same thing Britain and France were trying to stop years and years ago. The overtaking of the American empire by China and its other friends. That's what we're involved in right now. The difference, the salient difference today and then, is we have nuclear weapons. This is a very, very dangerous World War III. And to have Trump in the chairman's seat, so to speak, is an utter disaster.
And likely.
So we need to contemplate that for a minute. It's a very serious moment, in history. And in some ways, it is analogous to the situation at the end of the First World War. This is not the end of the First World War, of course, that we're getting into, but there's about to be a big defeat of the West inside, of Ukraine. And of course, the Europeans are contemplating then an escalation to, try to avoid a defeat. Trump seems to want to avoid nuclear war and extreme consequences, but the Russians are getting sick and tired of the West failing to adjust to changes in global circumstances and failing to respect the security interest, of the Russians. And with the Europeans throwing weapons into Ukraine to keep the conflicts going. The Russians are rightly thinking, well, if they're sending the weapons into Ukraine and the Ukraine is using those to attack us in Russia proper and to jeopardize the safety of our populations, we have the right to attack the source of these weapons. We're going to do that, with the Oreshniks. And we know what an Oreshnik is capable of doing to the NATO center in Brussels. And we're going to teach a lesson, to the West by giving them a demonstration. That kind of thing is a possible trigger event, for a nuclear war. And we may get it from Russia. So far, I think Putin and Lavrov have been showing the patience of saints in dealing with the stupidity of the Western powers. But whether they'll continue to do that, I don't know. It's asking a lot, of them, because there's a great argument for exposing the European powers to the consequences, of their actions, not the economic consequences in this case, but the military consequences of their foolish actions. This idea that they could send long-range missiles to Ukraine, so the Ukrainians could mount attacks against Moscow. That's just crazy. That's crazy. Moscow has already been replying to it of late with now very severe attacks on Kyiv. They're now pulling out all the stops in their military attacks on Ukraine because they perceive a continuing war as introducing a great danger, of a nuclear war. And the Russians are thinking that the best way to handle this now is to wind up the military situation in Ukraine as quickly as possible in hopes of diffusing the whole situation. So that brings us right up to date with what's going on right now.
We still have many years to go in this escalating. World War
not.
III under
Or
Trump,
not.
or not, or not.
Larry Wilkerson says, or not. And that's what we have to worry about, that we don't have many years. That we've got just a few months.
Larry, do you have anything you want to say to this before I get to Russia's response?
Well, I was just going to say that Trump is the anti-Dale Carnegie. I think Dale Carnegie wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence Enemies. Trump is writing the book of how to lose friends and inspire your enemies.
Yeah.
You know, and what's happened. Lula, the president of Brazil, going into the BRICS conference that he hosted, was, I think, a little squishy when it came to BRICS. He was sort of caught in between. He still wanted to be part of the Western world and still actually harbored hopes of, having better relations with the United States. And then Trump, in the middle, towards the end of that conference, releases on social media that he's now going to levy 50% the tariffs on Brazil, even though Brazil runs a trade surplus. The United States has a trade surplus. That means Brazil's in the deficit. So we're benefiting from that relationship, but Trump still levels tariffs on them because of their internal political situation with respect to Bolsonaro, the former president. Well, what does that produce? Enrages Lula and unites the Brazilian people who before were, there was some of the political division, but now they're basically saying to Trump, what the hell are you doing interfering in our internal affairs?
Yeah, not just that. Of course, that point is very, very important, that the people are enraged. But from Lula's standpoint, he must be completely enraged because Bolsonaro cheated with other people to bring fraudulent charges against Lula when they both were running for the presidency. And Lula was jailed for like 3 years as a result of that. So Bolsonaro put Lula in jail with what turned out to be completely fraudulent charges. And other people in Brazil went to jail over that. So now it's Bolsonaro's turn to face charges. And then Trump comes in and tries to save him from jail by pressuring Lula after Lula was put in jail, by Bolsonaro. I mean, Trump's an idiot. He's an idiot.
He sure is.
He's a freaking moron. He has no sensitivity for situations.
No, he doesn't.
He has no consideration of personalities. He doesn't even know what the F is going on with these personalities.
No, he doesn't.
In the past,
He just
he's an ignoramus. He never reads anything. Probably no one has told him that Bolsonaro put Lula in jail. And probably no one told him that. And he's such an ignoramus, he probably never knew it. I mean, how would Trump like it if Trump went traveling to Brazil and Lula put out a warrant for his arrest?
Yeah.
Coming down the pike.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if there's a warrant from the International Criminal Court against Trump that comes out, then Lula wouldn't hesitate to do that.
This is the same thing that police run into when they go out to try to intervene in a domestic dispute. And if they get involved with it, both the two disputing parties turn on them and attack the police. So Trump's done that in Brazil. And he's done that in Iran, too. Because notice that from the Iranian standpoint, June 13th was a Pearl Harbor Day for them. In the same way that the Japanese attack of December 7th, 1941, flipped a United States electorate that was opposed to intervening in Europe, flipped them completely where they were ready to go. Buddy, arm me up, put me in uniform, let's go. That's what's happened in Iran now. But it's not just confined to Iran. the Shia population, the Shia, but the Shia population throughout that area have started issuing fatwas and are lining up behind Iran in a way they never have before.
Mm-hmm.
Way to go, Donald Trump, man. You're doing a heck of a job.
And the
You're
Shia
taking
population,
people that previously were not necessarily.
and the Shia population in that area, the Middle East, from Iran, going west, through all of the Arab countries, those populations taken together, there's about a 50-50 split between the Shia and the Sunnis. So there are a lot of Shia who are pretty angry, at this point. The Shia in Lebanon, the Houthis, of course, Ansar Allah, Shia. The Shia in Iraq, who, by the way, a majority of the Iraqi population are Shia. There are a good many Shia in Saudi Arabia, constituting lower classes of the population. All the Shia are furious at this point.
Were willing to attack us. I don't want to say attack us, but that held out a prospect that we could work with them, that he's alienating one after another. It's an insane policy.
Yeah, and what's so insane about the Brazil context is that Brazil is one of the few countries where the United States has a trade surplus with. So all of this talk about trade deficits and needing to, ensure balanced trade between the U.S. and other countries, it falls right out the window, including also the letter that clearly explains that Donald Trump is seeking regime change, essentially, in Brazil.
Benny, I don't think Trump knows the difference. I really don't. I don't think he knows the difference. I don't think he could define habeas corpus, due process, or tariff for you. I do not think he could.
Well, let's get to the Russian response, shall we? Because there's two kinds of responses that Russia put out there to this threat. So as Donald Trump was leveling this ultimatum against Russia, Russia immediately responded. So here are the words of Sergei Lavrov at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, Foreign Minister Summit in Tianjin, China. Here's what he had to say.
Dmitry Peskov said, we would like to see what is behind that statement by President Trump. So now it's 50 days, 54 hours. We've heard about 100 days also. So we've been through that already. We want to see what the US actually wants. We understand that there's an enormous kind of pressure that comes towards the US from the European Union, from the NATO leadership, that are openly supporting Zelensky's demand to pump Ukraine up with weapons, including offensive weapons, at the expense of more and more harm coming to the taxpayers of the West. Now, there's a saying we have: don't dig a hole to someone else, or you'll fall into it.
So that's essentially the response from Sergei Lavrov. Now, we also had Sergei Ryabkov. He had a far more biting response to this, where he told TASS that Moscow wants Washington and NATO to take Russia's position very seriously, that position being that Russia does not tolerate any ultimatum. So, gentlemen, how about we start with you, Larry? What's your reaction to Russia's response to this? Because from the very beginning, it appears that Russia knew all along that likely these negotiations, even though they took the opportunity to engage in them, they were likely a bluff that was meant to subdue and subordinate Russia to U.S. demands. And it doesn't seem like Russia is taking that bluff.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. I've had the privilege of meeting and speaking with both Lavrov and Ryabkov. And, they're very serious guys. They're not bullshitters. They're not going to sit there and blow diplomatic smoke up your skirts. They're actually pretty direct. And they never hide behind sort of a very obscure use of language. They try to spell it out very clearly and directly, which is what they've done. They're waiting to see what the United States does, what Donald Trump does. They don't put a lot of stock in his words. They basically ignore them. They say, there goes Trump again. So let's look at what are the concrete things that the United States could do. Well, number one, the United States has not stopped sending weapons to Ukraine. That was according to Dmitry Peskov yesterday. The United States continues to supply Ukraine with intelligence. The United States has not named a new U.S. ambassador to Moscow. The United States has not looked at restoring the properties that the Obama administration took away from the Russian government that were here in the United States. And they've taken no steps whatsoever to open up direct flights between the United States and Moscow. So the Russians have been very clear what they're looking for in terms of diplomatic exchange, normalization of relationships. So they'll continue talking. They're not going to slam the door on the United States. They're not going to throw a tantrum like Trump throws tantrums. But they're going to sit back and wait and say, let's see the concrete steps. Otherwise, it's just, this is meaningless talk, meaningless bluster by Trump. And we've already seen that he makes all these threats and he doesn't follow through. So they're looking for action, not words.
Well, I go back to maybe it was 2002. I think it was late 2002, maybe early 2003. And Powell had just had a meeting with Sergey. And I went in to be debriefed on the meeting because I hadn't had an opportunity to sit in on it. And we had also had a series of foreign minister and ambassadorial meetings, if you will, with China, with France, with Germany, and with Russia. And in the course of the conversation, Powell turned to me and he said, Sergey has never told me an untruth, not so far as I know. He's an extraordinarily accomplished man. That's my summation of Sergey Lavrov. I don't know that I would have the stalwart patience and deliberation and circumspection that either he or Putin have with regard to dealing with first Joe Biden and then Donald Trump. We are, Danny, unparalleled in our duplicity, unparalleled in our creepiness, unparalleled in our ability and willingness to cheat, steal, and pilfer, and unconscionable in what we do in the world and call diplomacy. Take what's just happened with, as I understand it, and I think I understand it pretty well, what we're doing to the International Criminal Court. This is unconscionable what we're doing. And we had Rubinstein to tell everybody in the world that the United States was ending all aspects of international law that are meaningful. And we were ending it on behalf of that little miserable puppet state at the end of the Mediterranean called Israel. We are despicable. And what Sergei and other Russian diplomats and Putin himself have learned is just that. And now they're trying to figure out exactly how to deal with that despicability, that incredibility, that stupidity, that absolute obtuseness on the world scene, because we still have some residual power.
I thought that last statement by Larry was incredible. Just incredible. And it really speaks to, what it speaks to is how someone who is far from a radical, far from a lefty, far from a traditional peacenik, but who's uncompromisingly honest, what judgments a person like that can come to when he observes the actual behavior of the United States over a period of time. Our behavior has been simply despicable, as he says, and it continues to be despicable right up to this day. And we have to hope that the group of people still following this despicable foreign policy will somehow get us through the next few months and will somehow help to diffuse this very dangerous situation that can bring us into a nuclear war. We have to hope that somehow they will find the common sense and the wherewithal to accept the reality of the new world and to realize that they have to do what Doug McGregor is suggesting, specifically to reconsider everything, to conclude that we're going to be part of the multipolar world, to pull our forces back to the United States, handle our domestic problems, and take necessary measures to build a collaborative foreign policy with the rest of the world. I don't have any confidence that we can do that or that we're going to do that because the right people are not in power. Not only is Trump almost the worst person to expect that from, but he's surrounded himself with a bunch of yahoos and incompetence and people who hate other people that I don't know who he can talk to that can give him other perspectives. I know Putin has been trying to give him other perspectives, but then Trump goes and listens to people like Lindsey Graham or Bibi Netanyahu, and doesn't perceive that these people are just trying to use him and use the United States for their own purposes. I am reduced to hoping that Trump has a healthy fear, of nuclear war, and that therefore, in the end, he will make the decisions to back off. But I'm persuaded that that is probably a forlorn hope, because Trump just doesn't have the wherewithal to do that kind of thing.
Now, he just knows marketing, salesmanship, marketing. He doesn't really know the world. He sees it all as business transactions.
Okay, it seems clear, though, that he doesn't want to fight a war against Iran or Russia, or even China. That he doesn't really have the stomach for that, and he's trying to avoid it.
That's true. And plus, he doesn't have the attention span either to go, for anything that's long and drawn out. That's going to require thinking, and he's going to have people at him all the time, and he doesn't want any of that.
Yes, I agree. And that, I think, is the problem.
Right, because he's got all those people around him that are pushing for wars. He doesn't want it. And who knows what's being said, what kind of threats are being made, to Trump. To push him into a wartime scenario, or who knows what kind of lies will be told to him. different things to get him to push him in a certain direction. Because there are a lot of master manipulators around him.
Yes, there are. I don't know if they're really such masters
Hmm.
or just that compared to him, they're so much smarter that he is. Than he is. I mean, for me, the problem seems very simple. Just stop sending arms to Netanyahu. Come out very strongly for ending the genocide, okay, in Gaza. Completely stop the flow of arms to Ukraine, and sit back and watch things happen for a while. And just doing those acts will create credibility for Trump as someone who wants to end the wars.
Most definitely, because he's losing a lot of his base because, he spoke about no wars,
But simply
ending
apart
wars.
from those base, if he takes the concrete actions of stopping those things,
Hmm.
then he will also find that he'll be able to negotiate with Iran at that point also, because he will have taken concrete actions showing that he really wants peace.
Right. Actions speak louder than words, and
Actions
that's
speak
the
louder
thing.
than words, and they will begin to trust him again if he takes actions that say, we no longer want to be the hegemon, we want peace more. We prefer peace to being the hegemon of the world.
Exactly.
To take actions that send that message. Then he'll be able to talk to China, he'll be able to talk to Iran, he'll be able to talk to Russia, he'll be able to negotiate all kinds of deals, including probably membership in BRICS. But he's got to show that intention for peace and that intention for peaceful collaboration with the other powers of the world. I mean, there are powers rising all over the world, substantial nations. In the Western Hemisphere, there's Mexico, and Brazil. Okay. In Asia, there's Iran, Egypt, Turkey. Are all very significant states. In Africa, there's the Union of South Africa.
Hmm.
Okay, and also Ethiopia, Nigeria, all states with substantial populations. They are rising powers, and they will be rising powers. In Asia, there's Pakistan, Indonesia,
Hmm.
India. I mean, the populations of Pakistan and Indonesia are substantial, not as great as the United States, but 2/3 of the population of the United States. So very populous countries that will have a great impact on world affairs in the future. And then, of course, there's China and Japan and South Korea, all important states. Okay, and the ASEAN nations, all important states. And we have to come to grips with all of them.
Right, but he's got the people around him, and I guess you've got the Wall Street folks wanting to profit off of weapon sales and be the hegemon of the world. You have all those people around him, but the hegemony, and they fear BRICS, so they're battling BRICS. When, like you said, they should be looking at how we could have peace around the world and working together. He's got this other groups around him with this old worn out thinking.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And you wonder how people can sleep at night with some things, especially the people that look at their stocks. Oh wow, and look at it through the money. Oh, we're blowing up places, and the stocks are going up. I mean, it's such a sick psychology.
Yes. I think the way people sleep through it is they focus on things. They determine they're going to focus on things, that they have an affinity for. Okay, like to me, the most important questions facing us are the questions of peace and war. Now, I know a lot of things are very important.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the Medicare for All issue.
Yes.
Okay, is a very, very important issue. So people will feel, a certain affinity for that issue, and they'll devote their efforts to advocacy for that issue, and they'll become specialists in that, and they'll partial out the other issues, that are important for the world. I mean, some people will concentrate on the issue of the federal job guarantee. Some people will concentrate on, the fate of democracy, okay, in the United States. And their attention will narrow to that issue, and they'll spend all their time on that issue. And that's how they sleep at night.
But I don't think those people, especially people that are looking at issues like you say, the federal job guarantee, Medicare for all, I don't think they've got a bunch of stocks in the weapons industry where they're going bombing people and stuff like that.
Yes, I think that's very true. I don't
Because
think.
if you're a humanitarian in one area, I don't think you're going to be for killing people in another.
Yes, I think that's true. But my point is, if you're focusing so much attention and your activism in one particular area, okay, then you don't have time, to follow the war and peace issues.
Mm-hmm.
And your consciousness about how serious the situation is with respect to war and peace, it's just, it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you're not aware that, we may have only a few months or a few weeks left. Okay, because we just have a situation that can explode. If you haven't been paying attention, or you don't want to pay attention for fear of finding that out, then you just won't pay attention to that issue.
No.
And there's that. And I think that's why we don't have people more excited about the war and peace issue as we might expect.
Right. With some people, too, when it comes to foreign policy, they just, they tune out. They just have no interest.
Yeah, they tune out because they don't think they have any effect on foreign policy or can have an effect on foreign policy. But the truth is, they can have an effect on foreign policy, okay, if they try to exert influence through Congress. If they just are in a position where the Congress becomes afraid of a total loss of Congress people, over the peace and war issues, then that issue can break through to the front rank in various periods, within our history. It has done that. Okay. In other words, at the time of the Vietnam War, that reached a peak where it eclipsed all other issues. It was the most important issue. But for some reason, that isn't happening now, even though I would argue that the danger we face in terms of peace and war is the most danger we've faced in a very, very long time. And we don't have people excited about it at all. And so that's what gets me. Anyway, it is, I think, time to say goodnight once again.
Yes, it is. And I think you had a very informative show again. Very good show.
Well, thank you.
I agree.
And thank you very much for contributing to this very good show.
No, you're welcome. And good night, everyone. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Okay, I'll see you all Tuesday, and by then I won't be frozen anymore.
Okay.
I could have ended the freezing if I just, refreshed the page, of course, but I didn't want to take a chance on destroying any of the connections since everything else was going very well.
Yes. Don't touch, what do they say about that? If it's not broken, whatever. I can't think of the saying.
It wasn't completely broken.
Right. So just don't mess with anything,
Didn't want to take a chance that if I refreshed the page, it would somehow end the stream.
Right. So you didn't want to mess with it, which was the right decision.
Yes, I think so. So anyway, hopefully I won't be frozen on Tuesday, on Tuesday, and you'll be able to see me in a complete state of animation.
Okay. I feel like saying warm up, but I know it's the computer frozen.
Yes.
Good night.
Okay, good night, Dee. So,
I thought that was wonderful. That was just amazing.
I'm doing great shows, right?
Yeah. That was really great.
Okay, how about some seaweed?
Okay.
Time for some seaweed. When I started this show, I was almost out of power.
Really?
Absolutely. And then oh gee, I have to end the stream.